He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025, the 73rd day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. It's Liberation Day in America, says Donald Trump. He said it this morning. He's been saying it for months. He also said it about November 5th. And I'm not sure we were liberated on November 5th. Maybe some people were mentally. And I guess that's the same thing, right? Oh, where did I go? It's all just perception at the end of the day. We shall see if today, the day when reciprocal tariffs are meant to be applied, is going to be Liberation Day. Trump has a speech, and I imagine a press conference. He'll probably take questions. It seems like he takes questions everywhere at this point. That's supposed to begin at 4 p.m. Eastern. So at that time, I'm going to add that stream into this stream. And I don't expect the speech will be terribly long, but who knows? So we'll go over to that for 20 minutes or a half an hour, whatever it is. And then we'll come on back here for a little while longer. This is the stream for paid subscribers. So as always, thank you all very much for your support. And I guess with that, let's go ahead and get into it. So Donald Trump is today giving this speech in the White House Rose Garden. And so I want to talk about the Rose Garden a little bit. And here is a brief introduction to the Rose Garden from many years ago.
Just outside the Oval Office, on the opposite side of the White House, is one of the most famous gardens in the world. The Rose Garden. Anchored in four corners with magnolia trees and bordered by rows of crabapple trees and evergreen shrubs, beds of seasonal flowers form a geometric pattern based on an 18th century garden design. The creation of the Rose Garden was supervised by President Kennedy's friend Rachel Lambert Mellon in 1961. At the turn of the century, First Lady Edith Roosevelt had designed a colonial garden here, filled with old-fashioned flowers, sweet peas, black-eyed Susans, quince, and jasmine, among others. President Woodrow Wilson's first wife, Ellen, replaced the colonial garden with the first Rose Garden in 1913, but died shortly after its completion. The Rose Garden has been the scene of hundreds of White House events. In one remarkable meeting, President Kennedy welcomed a group of young men that would include a future president, Bill Clinton. The only wedding of a president's child outside on the White House grounds took place in the Rose Garden in 1971, the marriage of President Richard Nixon's daughter, Patricia.
So some of the history of the Rose Garden, and I thought this was particularly interesting. This is from just yesterday in Architectural Digest, of all places. Trump's White House Rose Garden pave-over plans unpacked. Recently, President Donald Trump announced his intentions to alter elements of the White House's exterior, including the historic White House Rose Garden. Plans include ripping up the plot's grass and putting in hardscape, possibly limestone, for a patio and some hardwood floors for dancing, reports the New York Times. The president later explained in an interview with Fox's Laura Ingraham that he's looking to give the space a gorgeous stone patio experience. You know, we use the Rose Garden for press conferences and it doesn't work because the people fall, he said, studying the wet terrain and women with the high heels. It just didn't work. He expressed that the roses stay, it's just the center section of the garden that could get an overhaul. The Times reports that the makeover will see the space transformed to resemble a patio like the one he has at Mar-a-Lago. And there are some pictures. He's walking here with Elon Musk. Elon's doing a weird thing with his hands, and we are wearing the same hat. So I guess that's kind of cool. The Rose Garden looks like the sort of place that powerful people would walk around plotting, a la Game of Thrones. Skipping down. Why does Trump want to pave over the White House Rose Garden? It may sound extreme to pave over the grass in such a legendary space. Trump is reportedly looking into hardscaping on the plot out of concern about foot traffic on the garden's soft terrain, according to reports from CNN and The Times. All of this foot traffic likely puts a lot of wear and tear on the lawn, so they may be looking for something more durable, says Christine Paulus, a contributor to The Rose Book, a text featuring essays exploring the horticultural history of the rose. And we will get into some of the symbolic history of the rose in just a moment. We don't know the extent to which Mar-a-Lago's design aesthetic will inform the Rose Garden renovations beyond what is referenced by the New York Times report, but according to Miami interior designer and founder of IV Atelier, Irina Vitiuk, the Mar-a-Lago-inspired design doesn't necessarily mean directly replicating the private club and blah, blah, blah. Here is some of the patio design at Mar-a-Lago. Now, I don't think the White House is going to be made to look like this, although it would probably be a lot cooler if it was. Melania spearheaded a restoration of the White House Rose Garden with landscape architecture from the firm Ome Van Sweden during Trump's first term. The renovations were controversial and drew backlash, leading to a petition that called for the changes to be reversed. As Paulus points out, the White House Rose Garden has undergone several renovations. And so, let's do this paragraph, this last one. It's possible for a proposed redesign to the White House Rose Garden to be successful, but it would need to be approached with sensitivity to the garden's historic legacy. The heirloom floral varieties that populate the space speak to its rich backstory. Cultivars include John F. Kennedy, Mr. Lincoln, Queen Elizabeth, Pope John Paul II, and peace. Okay, don't know what that means. All right, let's go ahead and leave the Rose Garden alone. So this is what it looks like, I guess, as of 2020. And the plan is to make all of that a patio. So we can think about what it means to pave over something. Often it is, the idea is kind of a permanent replacement for that thing. It's no longer there anymore. Whatever is in the earth there can no longer be dug up. It'd be like building a house on top of something or a building. That's it for whatever's buried in that rose garden, so to speak. Now, I have a friend who has spent considerable time examining the symbology of roses in relation to secret societies, its historical roots, the history of the imagery, and its relationship to the CIA. And so I asked ChatGPT to pull a few things up for me today. And it notes that the White House Rose Garden was created in 1913 by First Lady Ellen Wilson and redesigned in 1961 by Rachel Bunny Mellon at the request of JFK. That's the woman who was mentioned in that video, Rachel Lambert Mellon. She was married to philanthropist and horse breeder Paul Mellon. I believe this is the famous Mellon family, the oligarchic banking family, the Mellons. So a long history in the United States there and in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in particular. It's used, the Rose Garden is, for important public events and private strategy sessions. In terms of symbolism, the garden represents peace, diplomacy, and order, yet also serves as a private outdoor space for power negotiations. There's a long-standing tradition of presidents using the Rose Garden for major announcements, including war decisions and covert operations. So, major announcements, covert operations, war decisions. Interesting. We're having a major announcement today on Liberation Day, and we'll get into some more of that in just a second. The CIA and covert symbolism. The CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, has its own history of symbolic architecture and secrecy, much like the White House, okay, not directly related to the Rose Garden. And they say there's no official public connection, but some symbolic parallels. They note that the agency, the CIA that is, has a culture rich with esoteric symbolic language and ritual, often drawn from mythology, religion, and classical symbols, which is exactly what you'd want for a very patriotic intelligence agency. You want the most important job in the world, protecting the nation and guarding its secrets and its plans from those would-be attackers, to be totally run by people who are obsessed with the esoteric symbolism and can't help themselves but express it everywhere. Rose symbolism. I can't read. Rose symbolism, sub rosa, and secrecy. The Latin phrase sub rosa means under the rose and has long been a symbol of confidentiality and secrecy. It kind of means that it's in the background, something beneath the surface, sub rosa, okay? And you'll hear that in a literary use quite often. I remember when I was first trying to figure out what it is that Republicans actually believe, having discovered that the television lied to me about what they actually believe. And on the course, on that path, somewhere along that path, I spent a lot of time listening to and reading the National Review. And I remember that Charles C.W. Cook used to use the phrase sub rosa, and actually Noah Rothman, I think, used that phrase quite a bit as well. And they meant that it was under the surface. You knew it was there, but it was kind of hidden. And so I think, again, that is very interesting. And as you'll see in a few minutes, I think maybe that particular meaning might have some relevance in Trump's speech today, based on what we believe has been happening behind the scenes, under the surface, for the last 5 years. The phrase sub rosa dates back to Roman times, where a rose suspended over a meeting table implied everything said was to remain secret. Early Christian, Masonic, and even Renaissance court traditions used roses to symbolize silent trust or hidden truth. This directly ties into the ethos of intelligence agencies like the CIA, where secrecy is paramount. Possible esoteric or symbolic links. Some researchers or theorists suggest the Rose Garden's use as a ritualistic or symbolic space, a place where power is projected under the guise of natural beauty and calm. Presidents have met with CIA directors, foreign leaders, and war planners in the Rose Garden, suggesting a layer of soft power symbolism. Some interpretations, especially from esoteric historians or deep state researchers, indicate that the Rose Garden represents a sub rosa command post, a place where decisions of deep political consequence are made in plain sight, yet cloaked in symbolism. The rose itself, especially in its red form, has been linked in alchemical and Masonic traditions with knowledge, power, and silence. And so I think that is all particularly interesting. And I also think that this the setting today is obviously no mistake. Donald Trump is often communicating many messages to many parties and is very good at making those communications known. Brain Strain again in the chat says War of the Roses. I will say yes. I can't make that case myself as to that connection, but my friend who's very good at analyzing all this symbolism, she would tell you absolutely War of the Roses. I remember her bringing up the Orsini family, which is supposedly one of the 13 families that rules the world. So there's a lot of that symbolism, and you know, some people consider that just mythical or conspiracy theory and not actually true. I would, and Rosicrucians, of course, were mentioned as well. Lenny, I don't know what the answer is ultimately, but I think that the location of the speech today is probably relevant along these lines. Now, I remembered back in 2020, Donald Trump making use of the Rose Garden quite a lot because, of course, we had to have, you know, indoor gatherings were banned because of the very deadly pandemic. We needed social distancing. So they had the seats set up outside at, you know, spread apart. People, the reporters still wore masks anyway. But Donald Trump used the Rose Garden a number of times. The first instance during that period, actually, I can just pull this up, was when he announced the declaration of a national emergency due to the very deadly pandemic. This is from CBS News. Trump announces declaration of national emergency due to coronavirus. So this was March 13th of 2020. He said, to unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency. The article notes that the president is likely to invoke the Stafford Act, enabling him to increase funding for federal emergency management efforts. Although the president, FEMA efforts, by the way, although the president did not explicitly mention the Stafford Act. On another note, the president announced he's waived all interest on federal student loans for the time being, blah, blah, blah. No resource will be spared, nothing whatsoever, the president declared. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Political Moonshine account, and he has a blog. I interviewed him a couple of times a few years ago, and he used to talk about the Stafford Act and how the Stafford Act actually ties a president's hands in some way. He is then handing off and delegating power to expert bodies around the government in order to handle one of these big concerns. Now, John and I have taken a look at that stuff over the years. John Harold, I mean, particularly back in late 2021 or early 2022. Can't remember exactly, but we had a hard time pinning down that exact relationship. This reminds me of those conversations. We might have to give that another look. And so that was the first one. And then a couple of weeks later, Donald Trump went back to the Rose Garden again on March 29th. And that time was to announce the implementation of the Defense Production Act. And so in the question and answer portion of the event, one of the reporters said, Mr. President, you mentioned that the peak could come in 2 weeks. Can you ensure that everyone that needs a ventilator, every single patient that needs one will get one? Will it get there in time? And so this is back when we were still talking about ventilators nonstop. The experts told us that we needed ventilators, that people with COVID must be put on ventilators because they were certain to be going downhill very soon. And now most people understand that remdesivir and then a ventilator was the recipe for being murdered in the hospital and then being counted as a COVID death so that the hospital could collect money from the federal government. And the reporter went on, and my second question is, after invoking the Defense Production Act yesterday with General Motors, you said there were a couple of problem children that may require your authority again. What are those companies and what aren't they meeting? And so Trump responded, I don't have to tell you because those companies have come into line. They're doing a great job. They're working very hard, 24 hours around the clock. So I don't want to give their names now because they've been great. They've come into line. And by the way, General Motors is doing a fantastic job. I don't think we have to worry about General Motors now. They've really done a job. And what the Admiral said also, and I think this was, it starts with a G. His name just keeps appearing in my mind and then disappearing. Brett, it's like G&A or something. I could be totally wrong. Now I have to look, of course, because it'll just bug me otherwise. Huh. Oh, man. The machine's not giving me the right answers. Hold for processing. Admiral Brett Giroir. That's the guy I was thinking of. French sounding. I got to French sounding just using my memory. Let's continue. I think we can add this, Admiral. The reason we show more cases than anybody else in the world is we're doing more testing than anybody else in the world. So we have more cases because we're doing far more testing. And he continues talking about the testing. Now, I am very interested in all this because I think that the Defense Production Act is quite significant because that allows the federal government to essentially nationalize whatever companies are in America that need to be redirected toward the war effort. No matter what they're doing in a business sense, they can be redirected toward helping the country lead a successful war effort or to deal with a national emergency. And so that gives the president a lot of power. Donald Trump putting the Defense Production Act in place. Let's go here first. I was trying to figure out which direction to go. At one of our guards, I think it was in Dallas in some point in 2023 or 2024, maybe 2023. We often have the opportunity to have exchanges with General Stephen Quast, who was the commander of the Space Force and a brilliant guy. He's at all our events, and we're just honored to have him there and be able to have those exchanges with him. But I asked him at one point whether or not the Defense Production Act would allow for something like the seizure or takeover of a communications platform like Twitter or a media organization or sort of American company that's not a production company, right? A manufacturing company, which is kind of what we perceive as the intended purpose of the Defense Production Act. And that's how it was historically used. You need an auto company to make tanks or something along those lines. And he said it wasn't quite if I recall, and I haven't watched the clip in a while, but he said if it wasn't the Defense Production Act, then there was something along those lines. And because the national emergency, because Trump said that we were attacked and that we were at war and that he was a wartime president, and we've had those discussions over the last few weeks when it comes to the Alien Act of 1798, whether or not the president could declare war as a result of invasion or incursion and attack on our soil. And that is how Donald Trump classified the COVID pandemic. And you could see that as being much broader in its interpretation and more all-encompassing about the infiltration and usurpation of our Constitution, the takeover of our country that has happened over years, but really decades and really centuries. So it gives Trump wide latitude on what he's able to control, and then he delegates some of that authority to the COVID task force, to DHS, to the Department of Defense, etc., to deal with the national emergency. Now, I'm prefacing with all of this because, so March 29th, that would be 5 days ago, right at the end of March, through the beginning of April, that's when all of this stuff was being put in place in 2020. And we've talked about these dates before, and these dates are significant. This is from Senator of Wisconsin, who just had a fake election last night. We will get to that fake election a little later on. He posted on X, formerly Twitter, this morning, today is the 1-year anniversary of the day I gave POTUS my immigration chart on Trump Force One. I'm glad it came in handy. God works in mysterious ways. And so he's sharing some pictures. He's got these, he's got this paper in his hand, a chart about abortion in Michigan, Proposal 3, the Right to Reproductive Freedom Initiative, on 11/8/2022. And this was showing Michigan passing their right to abortion, I guess. So it's interesting that that is the chart in his hand in that picture. Then he shows Donald Trump standing up in front of that very chart with the arrows. We have seen this chart before. Ron Johnson says that this chart was given to Donald Trump on April 2nd of 2024. Okay? So we know that Liberation Day today, Trump could have put it on April 1st, but that would be April Fool's Day, and he didn't want to put it on April Fool's Day. So instead, he put it on April 2nd. I forgot one of the slides. This is Ron Johnson's chart. Okay? And as you will see on Ron Johnson's chart, there is no big red arrow right down there at the bottom like there is later on this very same chart. Now, let us go to that very April 2nd, 2024, 1 year ago. Okay. Donald Trump was busy giving rallies as part of the fake campaign leading up to the fake election of 2024. And here he is.
We let it be. And that's what's going to happen again. I make that promise to you. Your Medicare and your Social Security with me will be safe. But with them, it's not going to be safe. It's going to be destroyed. Not because they want to do it, although maybe they do, but I doubt it. But they do want people to come in endlessly. They had chances 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. Even when I came in, I built 571 miles of wall. We had 200 miles sitting there waiting to be erected, far more than I said I was going to build. And that's one of the reasons the numbers are so good. And if they put up the chart, when they put up that chart, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Put it up anytime you can, fellas. There it is. Right there. See that low spot? This is illegal migrants coming into our country. See the arrow on the bottom? That was my last week in office. That was the lowest number in history. When this guy went to the beach, if he would have just left everything alone, he might have gone down as a decent president, at least on the border. He still had a lot of other problems, let's face it. But on the border, look at that number. That number is so much lower than anything else. And then look at the right of that number. That's what happened after I left. It was an invasion of our country. It's an amazing chart, actually. I saw this. It's a Border Patrol chart. But look at that low number, got it down to practically nothing. Now, people came in, but they came in legally. We want them to come in legally, right? But you have to study that. I'll tell you what, even the fake news was impressed with that number. And they're not impressed with anything because they're fake. No one has been hurt by Biden's.
So, fake news is fake, as he said. Still, we have people just believing the news and then decoding the news and telling us what the mainstream media really means. What's the reality? Let's figure it out using the fake news. Okay. Here is factcheck.org a couple days later. Trump's misleading chart on illegal immigration. During a speech in Green Bay, Wisconsin, former President Donald Trump pointed to a chart on apprehensions of people trying to enter the U.S. illegally at the southern border. See the arrow on the bottom? That was my last week in office. That was the lowest number in history. But Trump was wrong on both points. In fact, the arrow is pointing to apprehensions in April 2020, when apprehensions plummeted during the height of the pandemic. In his last months in office, apprehensions had more than quadrupled from that pandemic low and were higher than the month he took office. Okay? So, to the extent that these numbers are real, they would be right. That totally refutes what Donald Trump is saying about the immigration trends. Also, to the extent that what we saw with Trump leaving office and Joe Biden being a real and legitimate president, and Trump then involving himself, not in the primaries, the fake primaries, he just straight up skipped those and went right into the fake campaign leading up to the fake election. And now he is president again for his third term. If the TV story was right, then that wasn't his last week in office. He stayed in office until January 20th of 2021, a full, 9 months later? So how could Trump get something like that so wrong? Anyhow, come back to that in a second. We've discussed many of these things before, but here we are. Here is Trump's chart. Now, you will notice the difference between this chart and the chart that Ron Johnson showed. There were no arrows in this chart. And it says on the chart, Trump leaves office. Okay? That's the date. It's this week in 2020. Now, these it shows the little letters. Each bar in this bar graph corresponds to one of those little letters showing what month of the year it is. And so that point to that particular time, the March into April point in 2020, Trump says that was his last week in office. So this is the 5-year anniversary of that date. What does it mean? Well, I don't know. I can't say for sure. Just seems like there's a lot of significance. Donald Trump says that chart saved his life. Did it save his life on April 2nd, 2024? No, we're led to believe that he means it saved his life on July 13th of 2024, on the day of assassination event number 1, because the bullet, as the story goes, fired by one Thomas Matthew Crooks, a made-up patsy of a character, missed Donald Trump's head by the slimmest of margins, just barely clipping the top of his ear, which healed miraculously under a large square of gauze 3 days later. Donald Trump was turned, pointing at the chart over his right shoulder. Had he not been turned and pointing at that chart, the bullet that hit his ear would have connected with his head, leading to a successful assassination event rather than just an upsetting episode of television. So, Trump credits the chart with saving his life. This is the chart that saved my life. Maybe. Interesting. What was going on in 2020 with that red arrow that he himself has added to that chart to suggest that is when he left office. It was also when he put the Defense Production Act into effect. And since then, we were told that Joe Biden was the real president. He was a fake and illegitimate president. And the entire time, Donald Trump talked about how Xi Jinping and other world leaders wondered if Trump was playing a joke on them, if it was just April Fool's Day every day for the last 4 years. That's how he was referring to it throughout that fake campaign of last year. And I got to wonder if he'll mention any of that today. I am, as I'm sure you are, looking forward to this speech. We got about 20 minutes to go, and then we're going to go ahead and check in on the stream over there. But I think there is a lot of symbolism today, and I think that we should keep all of that in mind if we are right, most particularly if my friend John Harold is right, that there was something happening sub rosa, under the surface, for these last 5 years. This might be some sort of end point. It seems like a bookend for that period that began at the end of March, beginning of April in 2020, and stretches to Liberation Day today in 2025. We don't know what Liberation Day is going to bring, but there's a lot of interesting options potentially. I actually wanted to share one more thing that I forgot to drop in the notes, but there was an interesting potential new element to the TikTok story, because that is another one of those dates that falls in this week, 2025, the 75-day extension of the TikTok ban. And just this morning, we have, for the first time, as far as I can tell, mention of some other companies in the mix for TikTok. This is Reuters from this morning. TikTok bidders pile up as deadline looms with Amazon and OnlyFans founder in the mix. Amazon and separately a consortium led by OnlyFans founder Tim Stokely are the latest to throw their hats into the ring for TikTok. The site faces an April 5th deadline to reach a deal to find a non-Chinese buyer under the threat of being banned from the United States. U.S. officials have raised concerns over the app's ties to China, which TikTok and owner ByteDance have denied. Trump administration officials are meeting on Wednesday to discuss the various options for TikTok. And a U.S. administration official confirmed Amazon had sent a letter to Vice President J.D. Vance and Department of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Amazon declined to comment, while TikTok and ByteDance did not immediately respond to requests for comment. And we, of course, talked about the strangeness of J.D. Vance spearheading, quote unquote, this TikTok effort. It is my assumption that the TikTok issue was handled back in 2020. And on some level, we know it was handled back in 2020. They talked about the data being housed at Oracle for these last many years, that TikTok data, not necessarily the app and the platform and its user base itself, although that is probably quite valuable. It's that data behind everything. And so it's interesting to see Amazon jump in this mix because, as we've talked about many times, Amazon with Amazon Web Services acts as a middleman for a huge portion of not only the country's, but the world's internet traffic. It goes through Amazon Web Services, which means presumptively that at all these middleman points, the people who control these routes, they are able to then capture and store that data. It's just a place where data can be accessed and taken. And when you think about how much the full possession of information in an information war, but in general, must matter, then the control over that data seems like one of the most critical aspects of all of this. And so it is a pet theory of mine that some of that is involved with this TikTok deal, and that TikTok is publicly symbolic in that as an avatar of that collection of data in that great cloud in the sky where all of that lives. We talked many times throughout the fake and illegitimate presidency of Joe Biden about what seemed to be a total lack of access to any real information throughout that entire fake presidency. The people on television pretending to run things didn't really seem to have accurate information at any point. They were never importantly right about anything. They were never really ahead of anything. The way our information used to work in terms of public communications and the information that makes up the public belief system in the collective consciousness, that was always generated by intelligence agencies trying to take over countries and wield power in those countries and overthrow governments and present these countries, once overthrown, with their new constitutions that would be modeled after ours and give them the freest system in the whole wide world. They can become part of our democracy. And eventually, as we know, the purpose of all of that is to implement the one world liberal international rules-based order. And you do that country by country, overthrowing them, destabilizing them, infiltrating them, gaining control, getting the citizens on your side. And then when they realize that they've been hoodwinked, they've been had, and then they rebel and protest and sometimes revolt, well, then you use that instability to take over again, further infiltrate, further implement the system. So when you're doing that, the most powerful weapon there is all of the information that goes out to populations so that you can control what the population believes and therefore how they respond to what they believe. And you can lead them, you can corral them continuously back into their own pen where they are perfectly controllable. If you have all that information, and you've always had all that information, and your advantage is based on the possession and use of all that information, and then that information is taken away, well, then you're screwed. And it seems like that's what we've been witnessing over these last many years, and is, to my mind, part of the freak out about the purchase, quote unquote, of X, formerly Twitter, by Elon Musk. They lost the possession, the greatest information weapon in the history of the world, all the data that goes with it. I believe that probably happened in TikTok, and it seems like we're going to have the bookend on that story coming up right now as well. Back to the article just for a second. Amazon has long harbored ambitions for an in-house social media network that could help it sell more goods and appeal to a younger audience. It bought live video site Twitch in 2014 for nearly $1 billion and book review site Goodreads in 2013 as part of its efforts to build a viable social network. Amazon also developed and tested a TikTok-like short-form video and photo feed called Inspire that it shuttered earlier this year. And so, again, this will be very interesting. Now, I don't know what the impact is going to be having an Amazon social media company. And by the way, I have no idea whether or not this is how it's actually going to go down, but Amazon is a Defense Department contractor. Amazon had Amazon Web Services. Who knows whether that was seized in the Defense Production Act, whatever actual private portion of that wasn't part of the government. We have all these quasi-governmental corporations that were told are private companies in every possible industry, linked in with the World Economic Forum. We pretend they're not part of the American government. It's very difficult to pretend they're not part of the global government infrastructure, especially when you look at the World Economic Forum partners. And I always love doing that, as many of you who, actually probably all of you, since it's the subscriber stream, but long-term listeners would understand that I often go back to the World Economic Forum so it's weforum.org/partners if you want to look for yourself. But here it is. You can see under the A's, there, my friends, well, I can't grab the link. But there is Amazon. So we know that these companies are plugged into the global governance infrastructure. Could Trump have taken them away? Is all of this wrapping up now? Last week, we heard that Twitter was going to buy X, formerly Twitter, was going to be sold to, I think that's the right way to say it, XAI. So it's sister company. So the transfer is a financial thing and an in-name only sort of thing in effect, but it becomes part of this other corporate entity, fully separated, presumably, from the situation before. These are interesting things to be coinciding along a timeline. And I think that these are the sorts of things that you can't just ignore. And I know that some of this does seem a little esoteric, the focus on symbolism and the rest of it, but hard to deny. So Donald Trump is expected in now 10 minutes to come out and give a speech announcing reciprocal tariffs on countries around the world. We have seen over the past few days, some countries have, quote unquote, submitted. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has announced that they would not be applying tariffs. Israel is apparently stripping away their tariffs. And who knows what that means? All right. I've said many times, the rules-based international order, the ultimate form of all of that when it's all done. And these are the things we have to think about. Like, what sorts of things would a full-fledged one world liberal international rules-based order be doing? How would it operate? Okay. And we don't have to be able to show that it operates like that in the real world to know that there are necessarily logical, reason-oriented ideas and goals about what that perfect, full, final form of the one world government would look like. And so, of course, if you have a one world government that has under it control over national governments and over all the corporations that provide the products and the services that all of the normal people, you know, the useless eaters in the world, would actually use, well, you would then be controlling all of that from a centralized node in a top-down fashion. People can't understand, how do all these things work together? How could there be this conspiracy when all of these companies have their own goals? Well, that's how. It's not hard to figure out, okay? You understand that the most powerful people with the most control, who create the money and don't give a shit about an average person, you can't possibly care about humanity if you're willing to call them useless eaters and treat them as though they are cattle, okay? If you have that level of power and control and you have those desires, well, you're going to set up a system to operate in the best possible way. And so you can allow competition way down the chain to figure out and to let that spontaneous exercise figure out how best to operate that system. But at the end of the day, it's all being controlled from the top. And so if you want companies that can't pull their weight to have the same experience and to be, quote unquote, equal to other countries who can pull their weight or pull more than their weight, like the US, for instance, then you would want some of the profit and productivity of the United States to go to those other countries. Sorry. That's how you end up with us paying extra for cars produced in Canada, even though we don't need cars to be produced in Canada, and why we would cut off our own energy resources and instead be purchasing energy from the rest of the world. It's because of the manipulations of that system from the top down. It's not just that our politicians in the past have made bad deals. It's that the thing is orchestrated from the top because of course it is. So if someone gets in a position of power and is able to wield that power over other nations in real ways, okay? Not abstract power being projected as a Barack Obama or a Joe Biden or a George W. Bush, etc., might do. These fully controlled presidents themselves, part of that global agenda, their job to implement that global agenda, where they're not going to upset the trade balance around the world. They're not going to throw a wrench in the gears of that perfectly constructed system. They would never do that. But if you opposed them and you actually wanted to destroy that system or destroy the control, the malign control over that system, then you might begin tinkering around with global trade. And I believe that that is what we are seeing during this period. And I believe that that's what the purpose of these tariffs is ultimately. And some of my friends don't agree with that. They think it's just leverage. We're wielding leverage against other countries, a much simpler explanation for these things that doesn't indicate the kind of the hidden hand, the unseen hand of that centralized control operative in these situations. I don't know how you can believe in that, but extract that element from this consideration. But everybody's got their own viewpoints, and that's all right. Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat minority leader in the fake and illegitimate House of Representatives, has tried to reframe all of this not as Liberation Day, but as Recession Day.
Beginning of this Congress, House Democrats have continued to make clear that we are fighting hard to build an affordable economy that...
And by the way, watch this guy's hands. He's always just such a ridiculous speaker. He's saying nothing, and his hands are doing most of the work to make it seem as though he's making powerful and important points.
Drives down the high cost of living for everyday Americans. Because the cost of living in America is too high. Housing costs are too high, grocery costs are too high, childcare costs are too high, utility costs are too high, and insurance costs are too high. America is too expensive. Donald Trump and House Republicans aren't doing anything about the affordability crisis in the United States of America. We were told that grocery costs were going to go down on day one of the Trump presidency. Costs aren't going down in America, they're going up. And the Trump tariffs are going to make things more costly in the United States of America. House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and Donald Trump haven't done a single thing to lower the cost of living in this country. Not a single bill, not a single executive order, not a single administrative action has been done by Donald Trump, House Republicans, or Senate Republicans to lower the high cost of living in the United States of America. In fact, Republicans are crashing the American economy in real time and driving us to a recession. This is not Liberation Day, it's Recession Day in the United States of America. That's what the Trump tariffs are going to do. Crash the economy, which has been happening since January 20th of this year. And the American people are taking note of it in community after community after community. But it gets worse. Not only have Republicans failed to do anything to drive down the high cost of living in the United States of America, they are trying to take health care away from the American people and end Social Security as we know it. Our response to that Republican effort, not on our watch. We're working hard to save Medicaid and strengthen and protect Social Security from Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the extreme MAGA Republicans who are on the run. They're on the run on the economy. They're on the run legislatively. Yesterday, they got out of town before sundown because they have no agenda to make life better for the American people. And they're on the run politically, which as Democrats, we've been saying since January, and now apparently other people are starting to catch up.
Yeah, Trump is on the run. And to substantiate that point, Politico released an article this morning about how Elon is on his way out. He's about to ditch, Trump's cabinet, the people around Trump, the people in the administration don't like Elon Musk and his interference, so he's going to leave. That scoop was not true. Trump and Elon have been talking about when he's going to wrap up his work. And is it going to be this week at the end of this little period? Or is it going to go through the next couple of months until we get to the beginning of America's 250th birthday? We'll see how long Elon sticks around, but that's not a big deal. And I'm going to wait to talk about the elections until after the Trump speech. But last night, there were 4 important ones that had captured national attention. The 2 congressional races in Florida, both of which went to Republicans, but by smaller margins than Trump's win in 2024, quote unquote, right? Fake election then, fake elections now. Reported results do not reflect the will and intent of the voters. They are just the reported results that the machine produces in support of whatever narratives they're attempting to run, to the extent they have control. And I don't believe that they have full control over these things. But anyhow, Republicans took those 2 races. In Wisconsin, the Supreme Court race that Charlie Kirk and Scott Pressler were screaming about, that Elon Musk traveled to Wisconsin to support with many millions of dollars. We'll get to all that later. They lost the Supreme Court seat. The Republicans did. But then won the confirmation of a voter ID election integrity measure being added to the Wisconsin Constitution, making it harder to rescind. So the same people, we are told, voted for a liberal woman on the Supreme Court and then also voted for greater election integrity, and a wide margin between those 2 outcomes, a margin that is just flat out impossible. And the good thing is finally that no one really is believing it. But let's stick with the Liberation Day for a second. I'm assuming that we will get to this press conference any minute. I'll do that as soon as I see the stream pop up. And if anyone in the chat sees it happen before I do, by all means, let me know. I have not seen that. Okay. All right. So let's go to CNN. This is this morning. I think it maybe was the video might have been from yesterday. Let's take a look at this, and I'll tell you why I think this is interesting.
President Donald Trump could reshape the world economy when he unveils his new tariff plan today. Here's an inside look at that upcoming announcement at the White House. Now, I'm told that the president spent much of Tuesday huddled with his close trade advisors, tariff policy advisors, really up until the 11th hour, finalizing, or as the White House said, perfecting this announcement. But so much of the key details are still unclear, in part because there was really these last minute pitches that were coming in, but also because this is by design. They want it to be veiled in secrecy. Now, this announcement is going to be made in the Rose Garden. It's his first event there. With it comes the pomp and circumstance we know the president likes for these types of events. But one of the things that's been very notable about that is it was initially scheduled for 3 p.m. and then was pushed back to 4 p.m. I say it's notable because 4 p.m. is after the markets close. Now, many people are worried about what this could mean for consumers. How will it affect them? Our trading partners, of course, figuring out what exactly this could mean for them as well. Hopefully we'll have more details after that announcement.
Would the senator yield for a question?
So the press conference was initially meant to be at 3 p.m. Eastern, we are told. Instead, it's going to be at 4 p.m. Eastern, which, by the way, is a few minutes ago now, and I don't believe we've gone over there. Trump is traditionally a bit behind on these things. Actually, I can share this let's go ahead and share this from CNN. I don't, of course, have a CNN account, so I can't show this for the entire time, but
for 40 years. The team around
him
is not a team saying, don't do this, you can't do this. The team around him.
Your phone is MIA, shall we say.
Exactly. Exactly. The team around him is saying, we will figure out a way how to do it.
Okay, so you could see the Rose Garden there with the flags hung in the background. It should be visually attractive. He's obviously setting up a scene, the scene design, the set design, if you will, for these TV presentations is always something that Trump takes into account. We discussed that at some length after the joint speech of this. I always call it the joint speech, the speech before the joint session of Congress a few weeks back, that Donald Trump is extremely focused on the image part of the presentation, understanding the impact that has in the age of television and internet in formulating these narratives and presenting a certain thing. Now, I think it's interesting that CNN talked about the closure of the markets because this is a tariff announcement, or at least is expected to be a tariff announcement. And over the last month or so, we have seen how the media responds when the tariffs are announced. We hear about tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and immediately then the markets crash in response. And then he says, oh, no, the tariffs are going to be delayed for a month. And then the markets crash because of the explanation becomes, oh, it's because of the uncertainty and the instability. And they just keep finding a different reason for why the market has crashed. I really have to wonder if they were planning on selling a market crash this afternoon as soon as that announcement in the Rose Garden began and the pushback in time made that impossible. Perhaps we will see that in the morning. You would expect the markets to respond, and I don't mean in a natural way, by investors out there reacting to this new information that Trump's going to put forward, as though he hasn't put it forward before, what he intends to do. I would suggest that part of the control over that system top down and the way the global economy is structured, as well as the full control that they used to have, or still probably have in some sense, over public communications and the information out there in the information war. I've talked many times about how X, formerly Twitter, can be used not only to overthrow governments as it was in the Arab Spring, to communicate publicly that these color revolutions are very organic and they are movements of, by, and for the people, but they're also able to shift markets using the influence over the information that they have, the privileged information that they have, and of course, the coordination with major investment companies whose investments and the movement of those investments is capable of shifting markets on its own. The White House today put out this article, and we'll go through this while we're waiting for Trump to appear. We still have nothing on that. Actually, hold for processing. I'm going to see if there's another feed that might take us directly to some of the coverage. Oh, here we are. Here we are. We're going to be about 2 minutes behind, but the event has started, and let us go over to that. He'll be joining us any second.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
And you can see the fireman uniforms, the construction hats, all presenting the image that this is about work, productivity, manufacturing,
Thank
etc.
you. Nice crowd. What a good-looking group of people. Well, we have some very, very good news today, and a lot of good things are happening for our country. Please sit down. My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. Going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen. We have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. We had an American dream that you don't hear so much about. You did 4 years ago. And you are now, but you don't too often, and for many years and decades even, you didn't hear too much about. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that. This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. For years, hardworking American citizens were forced to sit on the sidelines as other nations got rich and powerful, much of it at our expense. But now it's our turn to prosper, and in so doing, use trillions and trillions of dollars to reduce our taxes and pay down our national debt, and it'll all happen very quickly. With today's action, we are finally going to be able to make America great again, greater than ever before. Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. And ultimately, more production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers. This will be indeed the golden age of America. It's coming back. We're going to come back very strongly. We're pleased to be joined on this momentous occasion by Vice President J.D. Vance. J.D., thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Where are you, J.D.? No, that wasn't too hard to find. I was looking, he likes to take a low-key attitude, so usually we sit right in front. He's gaining a lot of confidence, Mike, isn't he? And nearly my entire cabinet is here, as well as Speaker Mike Johnson, who's done an amazing job. And with the great success we had last night in Florida, we have a majority of 7. And 7's like a lot when we had it at 1, right? You've done a fantastic job. And many of the members of the House and Senate are with us. Senators, Congressmen, thank you all for being with us. We appreciate it. For decades, the United States slashed our trade barriers on other countries, while those nations placed massive tariffs on our products and created outrageous non-monetary barriers to decimate our industries. And in many cases, the non-monetary barriers were worse than the monetary ones. They manipulated their currencies, subsidized their exports, stole our intellectual property, imposed exorbitant VAT taxes to disadvantage our products, adopted unfair rules and technical standards, and created filthy pollution havens. They were absolutely filthy, but they always came to us and they said, we're violating, we should pay for it. It's all detailed in a very big report by the U.S. Trade Representative on foreign trade barriers, and I'll just hold it up for you. It's available, and you don't have to pay too much. As I understand it, you'll pay nothing. It's a lot of work for something, actually, because it's a special book. It's frankly, it's very upsetting when you read it, when you see what people have been doing to us for 30 years. This all happened with no response from the United States of America, none whatsoever. But those days are over. Let me offer just a few examples of the vicious attacks our workers have faced for so many years. The United States charges other countries only a 2.4 tariff on motorcycles. Meanwhile, Thailand and others are charging much higher prices, like 60%. India charges 70%. Vietnam charges 75%, and others are even higher than that. Likewise, until today, the United States has for decades charged a 2.5 tariff. Think of that, 2.5% on foreign-made automobiles. The European Union charges us more than 10% tariffs, and they have 20% VATs, much, much higher. India charges 70%, and perhaps worst of all are the non-monetary restrictions imposed by South Korea, Japan, and very many other nations. As a result of these colossal trade barriers, 81% of the cars in South Korea are made in South Korea. 94% of the cars in Japan are made in Japan. Toyota sells 1 million foreign-made automobiles into the United States, and General Motors sells almost none. Ford sells very little. None of our companies are allowed to go into other countries. And I say that, friend and foe. And in many cases, the friend is worse than the foe in terms of trade. But such horrendous imbalances have devastated our industrial base and put our national security at risk. I don't blame these other countries at all for this calamity. I blame former presidents and past leaders who weren't doing their job. They let it happen, and they let it happen to an extent that nobody can even believe. That's why, effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. Thank you. Brian, I'd like to have you come up here for a second, okay? I just see him sitting. He's been a fan of ours. And he understands this business a lot better than the economists, a lot better than anybody. Brian, say a few words, please, would you? Thank you. It's a great honor to have you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I grew up just north of Detroit, Michigan, in Macomb County, known as the home of the Reagan Democrats. My first vote for president was for Ronald Reagan. I thought that was going to be the best president I ever saw in my lifetime until Donald J. Trump came along. I have watched my entire life, I have watched plant after plant after plant in Detroit and in the metro Detroit area close. There are now plants sitting idle. There are now plants that are underutilized. And Donald Trump's policies are going to bring product back into those underutilized plants. There's going to be new investment. There's going to be new plants built. And the UAW members, and I brought 20 of them with me, they're sitting right over here. We support Donald Trump's policies on tariffs 100%. So, Mr. President, we can't thank you enough. And in 6 months or a year, we're going to begin to see the benefits. I can't wait to see what's happening 3 or 4 years down the road. Thank you, Mr. President.
What a great guy. He got it right from the beginning. He got it before almost anybody else. This group over there, they got it too. And you know, we won the state of Michigan. We won almost all of them, but we won Michigan by a lot. And I want to just thank you all. The auto workers were fantastic. The Teamsters were fantastic. Everyone was pretty good, I will tell you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're going to be very happy very soon. And you probably see what's happening with all of the, not only car companies, but car companies in particular. See it with all of the ones they're moving, they're announcing day in, day out. You're seeing it. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. With today's actions, we're also standing up for our great farmers and ranchers who are brutalized by nations all over the world. Brutalized. Canada, by the way, imposes a 250 to 300% tariff on many of our dairy products. They do the first can of milk. They do the first little carton of milk at a very low price, but after that it gets bad, and then it gets up to 275, 300%. So when they're figuring what's Canada charging, they say, oh, about 2%, 3%. But take a look at what happens down the road. When you look a little bit, it's not a pretty picture, and we don't like it, and it's not fair. It's not fair to our farmers. It's not fair to our country. And with countries like Canada, you know, we subsidize a lot of countries and keep them going and keep them in business. In the case of Mexico, it's $300 billion a year. In the case of Canada, it's close to $200 billion a year. And I say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I mean, at what point do we say you got to work for yourselves, and you got to? This is why we have the big deficits. This is why we have that amount of debt that's been placed on our heads over the last number of years, and we're really not taking it anymore. Through non-tariff barriers, the European Union bans imports of most American poultry. You understand? They say, we want to send you our cars, we want to send you everything, but we're not going to take anything that you have. Australia bans, and they're wonderful people and wonderful everything, but they ban American beef, yet we imported $3 billion of Australian beef from them just last year alone. They won't take any of our beef. They don't want it because they don't want it to affect their farmers. And you know what? I don't blame them, but we're doing the same thing right now, starting about midnight tonight, I would say. And China charges American rice farmers an overquota, it's called, a tariff rate of 65%. South Korea charges 50%. Actually, they charge different, from 50% to 513%. And Japan, our friend, charges us 700%. But that's because they don't want us selling rice, another thing. Who can blame them, Madam Secretary? Agriculture, great job you did on eggs, by the way. The egg prices came down 50%. You got them down 50%. Once we got involved, they were going through the sky. The egg prices, they were going through the sky, and you did a fantastic job. Now we have lots of eggs, and they're much cheaper, down about 59% now, and they're going down further. We charge 2.8% for so many things that other countries are charging 200%, 300%, and 400% for. If imposing tariffs and protective barriers made nations poor, then every country on earth would be racing to eliminate these policies, and China would be the first on line. They run a very strong country, but they're not first in line, and the American people are paying a very big price. From 1789 to 1913, we were a tariff-backed nation, and the United States was proportionately the wealthiest it has ever been. So wealthy, in fact, that in the 1880s, they established a commission to decide what they were going to do with the vast sums of money they were collecting. We were collecting so much money so fast, we didn't know what to do with it. Isn't that a nice problem to have? What do you think, Marco? Good problem? Marco would love that problem. But we don't have that problem anymore, but we're not going to have it very much longer, I will tell you. But they collected so much money, they actually formed a commission to determine what they were going to do with the money, who they were going to give it to, and how much. Then in 1913, for reasons unknown to mankind, they established the income tax so that citizens, rather than foreign countries, would start paying the money necessary to run our government. Then in 1929, it all came to a very abrupt end with the Great Depression, and it would have never happened if they had stayed with the tariff policy. It would have been a much different story. They tried to bring back tariffs to save our country, but it was gone. It was gone. It was too late. Nothing could have been done. It took years and years to get out of that depression, far longer than even FDR had that office right over there for a long period of time. The ramp system, that's rather intricate, was built because of him. And every time you walk up, you think of him. And he did a great job in many ways, but it lasted long beyond his terms, as you know. But it's not too late any longer. And we're going to start being smart, and we're going to start being very wealthy again. We're going to be wealthy as a country because they've taken so much of our wealth away from us. We're not going to let that happen. We truly can be very wealthy. We can be so much wealthier than any country. It's not even believable, but we're getting smart. Nearly a century later, in the face of unrelenting economic warfare, the United States can no longer continue with a policy of unilateral economic surrender. We cannot pay the deficits of Canada, Mexico, and so many other countries. We used to do it. We can't do it anymore. We take care of countries all over the world. We pay for their military. We pay for everything they have to pay. And then when you want to cut back a little bit, they get upset that you're not taking care of them any longer. But we have to take care of our people, and we're going to take care of our people first. And I'm sorry to say that. And today we're standing up for the American worker, and we are finally putting America first. In Sleepy Joe Biden's last year in office, the United States hemorrhaged 100,000 manufacturing jobs, and the number was going through the roof at levels never seen before. And our trade deficit reached a record $1.2 trillion, which is unheard of. Since the beginning of NAFTA, the worst trade deal ever made. It was a horror show. I was able to terminate it. They all said you'd never be able to get it out. We had to get approval from Congress to get it terminated. We had to live with that deal. It was the worst trade deal ever made by far. But since the very beginning of NAFTA, our country lost 90,000 factories. Think of what that is, 90,000. Think about putting a map up and putting tax on it. You wouldn't have enough room. 90,000. I said, is that possible? We had it checked 4 different times, and it was actually somewhat higher than that. And 5 million manufacturing jobs were lost while racking up trade deficits of $19 trillion. That was the worst trade deal ever made. As a result of these gigantic losses, foreign nations now own $26 trillion more of American assets than think of this, than the Americans own of their own foreign assets or other foreign assets. The United States can no longer produce enough antibiotics to treat our sick. We have a tremendous problem. We have to go to foreign countries to treat our sick. If anything ever happened from a war standpoint, we wouldn't be able to do it. We import virtually all of our computers, phones, televisions, and electronics. We used to dominate the field, and now we import it all from different countries. A single shipyard in China now produces more ships every year than all of the American shipyards combined. Think of that. And it was a business that we used to dominate. We used to dominate it totally. In short, chronic trade deficits are no longer merely an economic problem. They're a national emergency that threatens our security and our very way of life. It's a very great threat to our country. And for these reasons, starting tomorrow, the United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. It's been a long time since we even thought of that. We used to think about it a lot. We didn't think about it for many decades, and you see what's happened. For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, very kind. You're not so kind when you got ripped off with your salaries. My auto worker friends and my Teamster friends and all of the unions that typically voted Democrat, they're not voting Democrat anymore because worker, whether union or non-worker, they're for the Republicans now. That's what happened. But we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. So the tariffs will be not a full reciprocal. I could have done that, yes, but it would have been tough for a lot of countries who didn't want to do that. I'd like to see the chart if you have it. Could you bring it up, Howard? This is our great Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. Thanks, Howard. So if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So it's 67%. So we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset? They will be because we never charge anybody anything. But now we're going to charge. European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%. So we're charging them essentially half. Vietnam, great negotiators, great people. They like me, I like them. The problem is they charge us 90%. We're going to charge them 46% tariff. Taiwan, where they took all of our computer chips and semiconductors. We used to be the king, right? We were everything. We had all of it. Now we have almost none of it, except the biggest company is coming in. We're going to end up with almost 40%. Lee Zeldin's working to get their approvals. And it's an amazing company. Mr. Wei, of one of the great companies of the world, actually. They're coming in from Taiwan, and they're going to build one of the biggest plants in the world, maybe the biggest for that. But 64%, we're going to charge them 32%. Japan, very, very tough, great people. And again, I don't blame the people for doing it. I think they're very smart in doing it. I blame the people that sat right in that Oval Office, right over there, right behind the Resolute desk or whichever desk they chose. Japan, 46%. They would charge us 46% and much higher for certain items like cars, little items like cars. 46%, we're charging them 24%. India, very, very tough, very, very tough. The prime minister just left. And he's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing for years and years and decades. And it was only 7 years ago when I came in, we started with China and charged them. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars from China in tariffs. And they understood, honestly. President Xi understood. He said, look, I understand. And the other countries, and they all understand. We're going to have to go through a little tough love, maybe, but they all understand. They're ripping us off, and they understood it. Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. He was a fantastic man. He was unfortunately taken from us, assassination. But I went to him and I said, Shinzo, we have to do something. Trade is not fair. And he said, I know that. I know that. And he was a great gentleman. He was a fantastic man, but he understood immediately what I was talking about. I said, Shinzo, we have to do something. He said, I know that. And we worked out a deal, and it would have been a much better deal, but frankly, there were many years left in the deal that was made previous to my getting there, but it was something. If you look at Switzerland, 61% to 31%, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia. Oh, look at Cambodia, 97%. We're going to bring it down to 49. They made a fortune with the United States of America. United Kingdom, 10%, and we'll go 10%. So we'll do the same thing. South Africa, 60%, 30%, and they've got some bad things going on in South Africa. You know, we're paying them billions of dollars, and we cut the funding because a lot of bad things are happening in South Africa. The fake news ought to be looking at it. They don't want to report it. Brazil, 10%, 10%. Bangladesh is 74%. So you see what's going on. Pakistan, 58%. Sri Lanka, 88%. So what we're doing is we're taking not the full, we could take the full 88%. Thanks a lot. He's doing a very good job. How's he doing? All right. I think you better take it with you. It's not going to last very long. He's going to put it, it's going to follow you down with the wind. I brought a hat just in case it got too windy, but here, would anybody like a hat? I'm not giving it to a cabinet. I'm giving it to the auto workers. Come here. Thank you, fellas. Get it. That's it. That's it. They deserve it more than our cabinet. Our cabinet has plenty of hats. But you see the numbers. The numbers are so disproportionate. They're so unfair. At the same time, we will establish a minimum baseline tariff of 10%. You notice that on the chart. And that'll be on other countries to help rebuild our economy and to prevent cheating. So we're going to have a minimum of cheating, and we're going to be very severe on the people that at the gate that watch the tariffs and watch the product coming in, because there's been a lot of bad things happening at the gate because the money is so enormous that you're talking about. There's never been probably anything like it in terms of the enormity, and there are a lot of bad things happen at the people that do the check-in, and they're looking at 10-year jail sentences if they do play. We're going to treat them so good, but if they cheat, the repercussions are going to be extremely strong. Foreign nations will finally be asked to pay for the privilege of access to our market, the biggest market in the world. We're right now the biggest market in the world. We had a great country 4 years ago in terms of the economics. We were doubling up on China. We were doing so well. Nobody was going to catch us, but so much of it slipped away over the last 4 years under Biden. I campaigned on this policy throughout last year, and today that promise was made, and it was also a promise, as you know, that was kept. Promises made, promises kept. To any company that objects to our common sense reciprocal tariffs, again, reciprocal, back and forth, back and forth. And I call this kind reciprocal. This is not full reciprocal. This is kind reciprocal. But what we do is we cut it in half. We charge them. My answer is very simple. If they complain, if you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America, because there is no tariff if you build your plant, your product in America. And we've seen companies coming in like we've never seen before. Likewise to all of the foreign presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, ambassadors, and everyone else who will soon be calling to ask for exemptions from these tariffs. I say, terminate your own tariffs, drop your barriers, don't manipulate your currencies. They manipulate their currencies like nobody can even believe, which is a bad, bad thing and very devastating to us. And start buying tens of billions of dollars of American goods. Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm. And many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before. And it'll be something very special to watch. I am so looking forward. And Brian, it's going to happen even faster than you said. You know, you might you might say, but it's already started. It's already started. Work's already begun on plants all around the country, and you see that as before. These are big, rich companies. We have $61 billion started on a big plant going up. It's going to be announced over the next 2 days, and they already started work. Many of these the biggest companies in the world, they've committed to build. We're going to build, sir. And they came here to see me, and they wanted to know if they could have a press conference. I do as many as I can. I'm pretty busy trying to stop Russia and Ukraine and the Middle East. We got to stop that. We're going to stop the Houthis, which we're making tremendous. They like shooting ships down and out of the water, sinking ships. They get a kick out of it, but they're not getting such a kick out of it now, are they, Mr. Secretary? They're not getting such a kick out of that now. But here are just a short list of some of the companies that have already announced and committed to investment. And this is a company that built its factories and its plants in China. Apple is going to spend $500 billion. They never spent money like that here. They're going to build their plants here. SoftBank, OpenAI, and Oracle, great companies, are investing $500 billion almost immediately. NVIDIA, a hot company, is investing hundreds of billions of dollars. They just announced. TSMC, the biggest, most important company in the world of chips from Taiwan, with no investment from us, is investing $200 billion. And they said the reason was, number one, the election of November 5th, and number two, the tariffs. They don't want to pay the tariffs, and the way they're not paying it is to build their plant here. So we're going to go from almost no percentage. We used to have 100% of the chip market. Now it's all in Taiwan. Almost all of it's in Taiwan, a couple of other countries, but mostly in Taiwan. And think of it, we had 100%. We lost it because of people in that office that didn't do their job. They allowed it to be stolen from us. Johnson & Johnson, great company, $55 billion. Eli Lilly, $27 billion. Meta is investing $500 billion. Wow. DeMac is investing $20 billion. CMA, CGM, $20 billion. And then you have Merck, Clarios, Stellantis, General Motors, GE Aerospace, Honda, Nissan, Hyundai are all putting in billions and billions of dollars, and they're committed 100%. So, and we've never had, and this is after 2.5 months. This is after just a short, this all took place as soon as we came out with what everybody wanted to do. You know, I watched a gentleman today on television. He used to work with Lee Iacocca, a very respected automobile person, and he said, you know, because they're asking people, they try and get as many negative people as they can, but they can't find them too much. It's pretty hard to find in terms of what we're doing, especially when they see all this investment. They said, so tell me, what do you think of what Trump is doing from the automobile standpoint? He said, I can't believe it. Somebody is finally, he's an older guy, real pro, really top guy, with Lee Iacocca. He said, I never thought I'd see the day when this would happen, where somebody had the courage to go and do what has to be done. This is transforming our nation. Our entire nation is going to be transformed, not only with the cars, but on every single other item that's built. We're going to become an industrial powerhouse. And he said that so beautifully today. In fact, I'm going to find out, I'm going to get a tape. And Bruce, I'm going to get that tape, and I'm going to send it to you out in Long Island, and you're going to play it for the people. And all your union workers and your non-union workers out there, you got a pretty even split. But we have, so far, it looks like we're going to have about $6 trillion of investments. And you wouldn't do that in years in this country over the last number of years. $6 trillion, and that's going to be much higher by the end of the year. And think of what $6 trillion is. You wouldn't have even a small percentage of that under this other system. We're going to be an entirely different country, and it's going to be fantastic for the workers. It's going to be fantastic for everyone. There will never have been a transformation of a country like the transformation that's already happening in the United States of America. It's an incredible thing to watch, and it's incredible to meet with the top people that you read about, very wealthy people, or people that are great managers and executives and presidents of big public companies. and to watch the enthusiasm they have now that they didn't have. They gave up on our country. They went to foreign countries and they built. Companies are pouring into our country at levels never seen before with jobs and money to follow, and it's really beautiful. In the coming days, there will be complaints from the globalists and the outsourcers and special interests and the fake news. Always, the fake news will always complain. But never forget, every prediction our opponents made about trade for the last 30 years has been proven totally wrong. They were wrong about NAFTA. They were wrong about China. They were wrong about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have been a disaster if I didn't terminate it. If I didn't terminate that, United Auto Workers, you would have had no jobs in this country. You would have had no jobs. It was all going to other countries. In my first term, they said tariffs would crash the economy. Instead, we built the greatest economy in the history of the world. And again, I have great respect for President Xi of China, great respect for China, but they were taking tremendous advantage of us, and I commend them for that. I say, hey, if you can get away with it, that's okay. But they understand exactly what's happening, and they probably, most of them are saying it's about time they did something. But and they're going to fight, and they're going to fight fair. Everyone's going to fight. It's like I say to the leaders, look, you got to take care of your country, but we have to start taking care of our country now. We can't do what we've been doing for the last 50 years. From the day of my election, the stock market went up in my first term 88%, with NASDAQ going up 155%, more than any president has ever had in any term in office, by far. And I think we're going to blow that away. And maybe the numbers won't show, but I think they're going to show much better than even those numbers. But what you're going to see is you're going to see activity, that empty, dead sites, factories that are falling down. Those factories will be knocked down, and they're going to have brand new factories built in their place. They're not only talking about renovating, they're talking about brand new, the best anywhere in the world, the biggest anywhere in the world. I have a friend who builds car plants, and I said, I want to see the biggest and the best. He said, well, we have to go to Mexico. I said, no, I want to see it in the United States. He said, we're not building them in there. This is a year and a half ago during the campaign. He said, we're not building it. You'd have to go to Mexico. When I was starting to decide to run, and I went to number one in the polls very rapidly, I want to say, like, let's say in the first hour. And then shortly thereafter, it looked like I was going to win, and the fake news was saying, oh, no, don't do this. What they don't know is if I didn't win, they would have really been in trouble, because nobody wants to read them anyway. But I tell you what, when it looked like I was going to win, I announced that I was going to be doing exactly what we're talking about today. Great consistency, actually, because I've been talking about it for 40 years. But because I saw what was happening 40 years ago. If you look at my old speeches when I was young, very handsome, my old speeches, and that people would say I'd be on a television show, I'd be talking about how we were being ripped off by these countries. I mean, nothing changes very much. The only thing that changed were the countries, but nothing really changes. But it's why it's such an honor. It's such an honor to be finally able to do this. If you look at China, I took in hundreds of billions of dollars in my term, hundreds of billions. They never paid 10 cents to any other president, and yet they paid hundreds of billions, so much so that Biden couldn't do anything. They wanted to try and terminate it because he had a very special relationship with China. You know what the relationship was? He had a special relationship. But the numbers were so big. The numbers were so big that they couldn't do it. So they did ease it up. They did things that they shouldn't have done. They made it a lot more comfortable for them, but they couldn't do it because the numbers were hundreds of billions of dollars, and I did that. And we were on our way to doing something like incredible. And then we had a very bad election happen, a very bad election. A lot of bad things happened. So when I said we got to do it again, I said we have to make it too big to rig. And we made it too big to rig, and we won in records, and it was a monumental win. And it was such an honor to see so many of you, like Brian and your friends, here with us to celebrate, and to more importantly celebrate what we're doing, because that wouldn't be a full celebration if we didn't do this, because this will be an entirely different country in a short period of time. It'll be something the whole world will be talking about it. The critics made the very tired predictions earlier this year, but in February, core inflation dropped to the lowest rate in 4 years. And the price of eggs, as you know, just in a month and a half, we were there for 4 weeks. And the first week, I got blamed for eggs. I said, I just got here. They said eggs have gone up at like 250% and you can't get eggs. And they were going crazy. And I said, I just got here. And then we got to work on eggs. And we got to work on everything. And our great Secretary of Agriculture, you did a fantastic job. Brooke Rollins, she did a fantastic job. And as I said before, the price of eggs dropped now 59%, and they're going down more, and the availability is fantastic. They were saying that for Easter, please don't use eggs. Could you use plastic eggs? I said, we don't want to do that. We want to, and you really came through. It's an amazing job. Thank you very much, Brooke. You did great. But likewise, an old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it in the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it. Groceries went through the roof, and I campaigned on that. I talked about the word groceries for a lot, and energy costs now are down. Groceries are down. Gasoline is way under $3, and people are beginning to be able to buy things and live again. We brought prices way down. We created 10,000 already in a few weeks, new manufacturing jobs, and it was that took place in 1 month, numbers that they haven't seen in a long time. We had virtually no inflation under my term. We had virtually no inflation for 4 years, but after transitioning over to Sleepy Joe, it went from almost non-existent to the highest in the history of our country. We had the highest inflation in the history of our country, brought up by energy and bad spending and bad policy, and a lot of bad things happened. How about allowing millions and millions and millions of people to pour into our country with open borders, where it's so sad to see even now. And I see our great secretary, you have done, stand up, please, Christy. Stand up. Christy Noem. And Tom Homan. These people are doing a great job, but gotten them out in records. We have problems with judges that don't want them to go out. They want Tren de Aragua, and they want MS-13, the most vicious gangs ever. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Absolute killer gangs. They kill people. They don't even think about it. And we put them out, and we have judges now, radical left judges that they don't want them to go out. They want them to even be brought back. Let's bring them back. You've done a fantastic job, and please thank everybody. Homeland Security, thank everybody. Appreciate it. And we now have a border that's the best border that we've ever had, even better than it was my first term. My first term we did good, but this one we really specialized in. We've done really well. And we had records then. We had the best, safest border. 4 years ago, we had the best border there ever was. And now we have, you've actually matched it and done even better. And we're going to get it down the right way. And we want people, by the way, to come into our country, but we want to come in through a legal process. We want them to come in legally. We need more people. We need people to run these plants and to help the auto workers and the Teamsters and the non-union people and everybody else. But we need people and the farmers. And we're going to let people come in, but they want to come in. We want them to come in legally. They have to have the capability of loving our country, not people that hate our country. We don't want them in our country. And now we're going to pass the largest tax cuts in American history, and that's where we're relying on Mike and John Thune. And we will not cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid benefits, and the Democrats will, because if they got in, the entire economy would collapse. This country was heading for a collapse under the people that you saw. They were horrible. I think one of the reasons people like the job, I have my highest approval ratings because I think they're comparing me to the worst administration in the history of our country. So I appreciate that at least. But Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and Senate Majority Leader, appreciate it, Mike. John Thune have been fantastic, by the way. But they've been working tirelessly on taking the next step to pass the plan for our one big, beautiful bill. I'd like to name it that if you can. One big, beautiful. I made that statement about 6 months ago, and everybody calls it one big, beautiful bill. And it will be that. It'll have everything, the big tax cuts and every incentive there is. And it'll be fantastic. And by the way, for the cars, we're asking for an interest deduction on a loan. So if you build the car only in America, we do it, Brian. If the car's not built in America, you don't get the interest rate deduction. But if you build the car in America, if you buy a car, if it's built in America, then you get an interest rate deduction, tax deduction, and that's a big thing. It's going to be a big thing. I think that's going to pay for itself very quickly, that deduction. Never happened. We've never had anything like that before. Somebody said, where do you get the idea? Because it's so basic. You would think that would have happened a long time ago. It never did, and I'm very happy it didn't, because now I can say that was my idea. But we're going to get us closer to the debt extension. We have to get the debt extension passed, and I know you're going to be able to do that, Mike, and it's very important that you do that. And all of the other things that the Senate budget plan gives us, along with working, because I know they're working together, John and Mike, and the two bills are going very well together. We need to get our shared priorities done, including certain permanent tax cuts. We want the tax cuts to be permanent, spending cuts, energy and historic investments in defense, border, and so much more. We're covering everything. These will be phenomenal. There'll be no bill like this going to straighten. One bill is going to straighten out our country for many, many years to come. And we said, let's just do it and let's get it done. And some guys will love it and some guys will like it a little bit less because they're not getting what they were exactly looking for, but they're getting a lot. They'll never, if we get this done, it'll be the most incredible bill ever passed in the history of our Congress and Senate and congressmen, the senators and the congressmen, many of whom are here today, will be very proud of themselves. I really believe that. It's going to set us on a whole new prosperous path. We're going to cut spending and right-size the budget back to where it should be. We're going to do that very strongly. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, John. Thank you. Oh, look at all of our senators over there. Oh, boy, that's a nice group of people. But I won't like them so much if they don't get this bill done. That's a great group. And Congressman, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Tremendous people. The Senate plan is my complete and total support. And the House plan, likewise, is very similar. They're moving along pretty much at the same clip. And as soon as you're ready, you'll show it to me. And I'm sure it'll have my support, Mike. Every Republican congressman and senator must unify. We have to unify. We can't be separated. We have to get it done. We have to get absolutely everything we can, and we have to take care of the American people. That's the only thing that matters. We have to take care of the American people first. We need to pass this bill immediately, get it done, including debt extension. From this day on, we're not going to let anyone tell us that American workers and families cannot have the future that they deserve. We're going to produce the cars and ships, chips, airplanes, minerals, and medicines that we need right here in America. The pharmaceutical companies are going to come roaring back. They're coming roaring back. They're all coming back to our country because if they don't, they got a big tax to pay. And if they do, I'll be very happy, and you're going to be very happy, and you're going to be very safe. We're going to build our future with American hands, with American heart, American steel, and we're going to build it with American pride like we used to. We're approaching our 100th day as president and have been given credit by a lot of people, actually, even some of the fake news. Can you believe it? Which in this case, hopefully isn't fake, for having done more in that time than any other administration in the history of our country in the first 100 days. I think we've had an amazing in terms of what we've done, what we've gotten accomplished. I'd like to see if we can get that war ended and another war from not starting in the Middle East. We have to get Russia. They're losing 2,000 on average, 2,500 people a day, young people, soldiers, Russian. Think of that, 2,500 through some days, but on average, probably over about a 1 week period, it's 2,712, they say. They're losing those soldiers. They're dying. They're being decimated. And they're not from our country, but they're from other countries. But they're human beings. They're from Russia. They're from Ukraine in this period, most of them. And we're going to get it stopped. It's a senseless war that would have never happened if I was president, and it shouldn't be allowed to go on. And I think we're being given good cooperation by Russia and by Ukraine, but we have to get it stopped. It's humanity. It's humanity. It's a terrible thing. This will be a very big moment. I think you're going to remember today. It's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I suspect that means that we will not be seeing him take questions, but we'll hold with it for just a minute. Though I suppose some of you are probably ahead. Okay. So that was the big announcement. Kept it confined more or less to just the tariff topic. And then he talked a little bit of the Russia-Ukraine situation there at the end. I thought there were a bunch of interesting moments in that. I think that he made points that align with the framing I presented earlier in terms of the top-down centralized control over the economy worldwide being disrupted by this new way of going about things. He showed that chart that I saw Garrett Ziegler pointed out over the course of that speech. Peter Navarro, the Trump trade czar, had put together. Trump started the speech by saying, this will be remembered as the day that American industry was reborn, American destiny reclaimed, and it would be the day that we begin to make America wealthy again. He talked about the non-monetary barriers put up by other countries, and I think that he's referring to various kinds of manipulation that force that top-down control, that force companies, countries, industries to implement the regime agenda for the worldwide economy. He said he doesn't blame other countries for the imbalances. He blames our former leaders, and he made it clear that the heads of industries, companies, and countries were just doing what would be best and most profitable, and what they ultimately had to do. Probably a lot of that was due to the malign influence and the covert influence of regime intelligence, and then underlying that, unfortunately, American intelligence, since so much of the global regime agenda and the implementation of that agenda was pushed forward by the American government, by the American military, by the American people's effect on the world economy. A lot of people were brought under the sway of that global regime who maybe wouldn't have wanted to principally, but were forced through pragmatic concerns to go along with that agenda. And then, of course, there are others who are just in it for the profit and the power. He noted, I thought really interestingly, that the major problem started in 1913. He said, for reasons unknown to mankind, we established the income tax and thereby made it so that the American people would be essentially subsidizing these other countries as part of the global economy. What could be paid for by other countries through tariffs was instead paid for directly by the American people. So that is not the same thing as the American people getting taxed and then those tax dollars paying for our roads and the improvement of our schools and our infrastructure or the defense of our country or anything like that. It's us paying the global regime via their bagmen at the IRS facilitated by the Fed, the Federal Reserve. We are paying the global regime to subsidize the implementation of that one world liberal international rules-based order and the top-down control over the world's economy. I love when he talks about the income tax in these terms. He's talked many times. I did an episode. It's been almost a year now that I did the episode "Read My Lips, No Taxes," after he announced that there would be no tax on tips, and then that became no tax on overtime, no tax on, was it Social Security? And in the financial world that I think many people see in the future, it might be impossible to extract taxes from the people in the first place. One would at least hope. I guess there's some reasonable concern over what the role of stablecoins will be in terms of the ability for the government to turn off your money. One of the major concerns about central bank digital currencies, Trump has said many times, there will be no central bank digital currency. I hope that we don't end up with that under a different name. There are pros and cons about the stablecoin ideas. We'll see how that ultimately plays out. He mentioned 1929. He said the Great Depression would have never happened if they had stuck with tariffs rather than that income tax. At various points, they tried to bring back tariffs, but it was too late. We saw the influence in Europe of that global economy when Germany, for instance, tried to extract itself from that global economy. The control over economics has been one of the major elements of the global regime's control apparatus for these last 100 years, but truthfully, much, much longer. Control of media, control of finance, trade routes, resources, and ultimately military. And if you're taking out one of those major pegs, which this may well be doing, you have, in some sense, extracted yourself from the global regime control. He mentioned that FDR sat in the White House for many years longer than he should have. He said that it lasted long beyond his terms. And of course, FDR, as we discussed the other day, was in there for 4 terms. He also said, Donald Trump did, that it was such an honor to finally be able to do this. And it occurred to me that he was probably talking that word finally. He's probably talking about his own position on this issue that has lasted now for decades. And let's take just a second and watch this clip made 5 years ago that includes Donald Trump's famous performance on Larry King back in the 80s.
Despite the uneven consequences, President Trump was all in on the tariff strategy. It's a strategy he's been talking about for years, as far back as the late 1980s, when he first tested the possibility of becoming president.
Our guest, the famed developer Donald Trump of New York.
Back then, Trump's target was Japan and its trade practices.
The fact is that you don't have free trade. We think of it as free trade, but you right now don't have free trade. And I think a lot of people are tired of watching other countries ripping off the United States. This is a great country.
He believed from the beginning that there's really nothing worse than being laughed at.
They laugh at us. Behind our backs, they laugh at us because of our own stupidity.
And he came to see the Japanese as laughing at the United States, taking advantage of the United States by stealing the jobs, by...
These people are so ridiculous. When Trump's saying these other countries are laughing at us, it's because they can't believe that they're getting the deals they're getting because they're so undeserved. And of course, they have to reinsert themselves as the mainstream media and let you know that this is really all about Donald Trump's ego, his narcissism, and his refusal to be made fun of. Totally unbelievable. But let's get back to it.
dumping product here.
We let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets and everything. It's not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible.
After Japan's economy cratered, Trump shifted his ire to a rising economic power, China.
They are ripping us like we've never been ripped before. If you look at Japan, if you look at China, where we lose $100 billion a year with China.
He's been saying the same thing for 30 years. Donald Trump has a very binary view of life and certainly of the world. And so to confront China, which he perceives as America's most important and dangerous rival, and to be able to use blunt instruments against them and to come out and at least be able to say that you're a winner and they're a loser, it's hard to imagine anything more appealing to the core of his personality.
Please welcome the next president of the United States, Mr. Donald J. Trump.
By 2016, Trump's message had finally found an audience, and his focus on trade and China had found its moment.
First time I ever met Trump, I was, coming out of Goldman Sachs and being somebody that's been in finance for a number of years, I was set to be unimpressed. I was actually very impressed. Now, he didn't know a lot of details. He knew almost no policy. Yeah. But what I found most extraordinary was when we got to the section on China, which I kind of threw out there, of a 2-hour meeting, almost 30 minutes or more was all about China.
We have a $500 billion deficit, trade deficit with China.
And you got to remember, a lot of this, he was just reciting everything he'd heard from Lou Dobbs.
We're talking about a trade deficit of $315 billion last year with the Chinese.
He's been a guy that's watched Lou Dobbs for 30 or 40 years. And the only thing he had formed as a worldview was China.
Because we can't continue to allow China to rape our country. And that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
Talking this kind of vernacular. That kind of hit people in the gut, and particularly when we talk about trade and jobs and job shifting overseas.
What was his message to these people on trade? China's to blame?
The message is very simple, is that the elite shift the jobs overseas, and I'm going to bring it back.
So that's quite an interesting piece. They talked about Donald Trump, that same communist who brings everything back to Donald Trump's narcissism, his ego, his stupidity, which is what he's inferring in that, or implying, I should say, in that second clip about the binary thought process. Well, under what scenario could the tariff thing be binary? Exactly the scenario I described before. If you start implementing tariffs, that means a country is shifting the balance that's set in place. So it's either our democracy worldwide with quote unquote free trade, which means they're free to make it however they want, or you have the sovereign nationalist policy of tariffing other countries and operating in a way that best suits your own country. So being binary about that, global regime system or sovereign nationalist system, it is a binary. There's not really a mixture of those two things. And it really is just good twin, evil twin, as we've talked about for these past many years. It is the urge, the motivation, the system of control toward centralization, or the urge toward decentralization, fragmentation, the spreading out of that control, and the removal of the centralized and centralizing controlling force. And so it really is a binary. Donald Trump is on one side of that binary. The American people have joined Donald Trump on that side of the binary. And so this is how we will be going forward into the future, it certainly seems. All right. Now, I know that there were a few Rumble rants in the chat. Sorry, I was just trying to read and make sure that I was understanding them. Polymath and on $5. APL said this podcast is the internet's best kept secret. I agree. Thank you, Chris Paul. That's what you get for a mention of Una Panoonah Banca herself, Anna Paulina Luna. We might get to her a little later in the program, or maybe we can do it quickly after we get through this other Rumble rant. APL to make up for Bannon defaulting on this duty. And how dare you say that about Steve Bannon? So I think that she means Steve Bannon had Una Panoonah on yesterday in the morning to announce her JFK hearing. She had a big hearing in Congress where they were going to go over the JFK files. She brought in film director Oliver Stone to talk about JFK. Absolutely nothing new was revealed. I am led to understand. I did not waste my time watching it because it was apparent from having heard her on Bannon in the morning that nothing new would be revealed. She said explicitly that it was a good thing for Americans to have trust and to have faith in their government, and that had been ruined from these last 60 years since the Kennedy assassination. And that must be restored, and the only way to restore it is through transparency. But do we have an answer? No, we don't. So that whole display looks to me as nothing more than a pre-scripted narrative. The regime, the uniparty right, was going to take credit for bringing the American public the truth about JFK. And through events like that, we would see that they have been successful in that mission. Except, of course, Donald Trump already preempted that a few weeks ago, released all the files. People understood, oh, there's really not anything else here than what we knew before. And how many rugs do we need to stand on before we are prepared to recognize when we are standing on a rug? Imagine that you could not tell the difference between grass outside or the AstroTurf grass that you can roll down on a patio or a rug in your living room. You just think they're all the same thing. Well, I'm stepping on this thing, so it must be the same. No, you need to learn to recognize rugs. If you're told that you're about to get the truth of JFK from a bunch of congressmen who can't even prove that they were legitimately elected into office, you're going to have a hard time. If you French fries when you're supposed to pizza, you're going to have a hard time. And I don't know if people are familiar with that reference. Let's just bring it up quick. I love a good South Park reference all of the time, anytime. I basically relate everything to South Park and Mitch Hedberg. Mitch Hedberg's comedy
he
in my head.
French fried when he should have pizza. You French fry when you pizza, you're going to have a bad time.
So that is a ski instructor letting the kids know that if you French fry when you're supposed to pizza, you're going to have a bad time. It's pretty simple. If you step on a rug thinking that it's not a rug, it can't be a rug this time, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to rug yourself. And we need to stop rugging ourselves because at some point, we cannot blame the television for lying to us. The television lies to us. That's what it does. Starborn01, $10. Chris, do you think today was a rug or only a 50% rug? I don't think today was a rug because I didn't really expect anything else. I think that we will begin seeing what today meant as we go forward. I don't think there's any way that any of this is ever going to just resolve itself in a moment, barring maybe indisputable and conclusive public understanding that our elections are fake. Okay? That's the sort of thing that could tell everybody all at once, wow, the reality that I thought I was experiencing is simply not the reality that I am experiencing. And then at that point, we might have a startling sort of event. I think there's also still a possibility that we'll get some sort of scare event, maybe with a kinetic element that is real, that might shake people out of it, right? If we were told that some spot in the United States of America, even if it was in a desolate wasteland that is next to some town or something, if we were told that the U.S. was struck with a nuclear missile, then maybe people would wake up at once. Otherwise, I think that what we're going to see is some of the fallout from these plans as it happens over time. And to be honest, I think that that's what we've been seeing for the last 5 years and what I think we've been tracking on this show specifically for the last 5 years. Okay. The freak out that occurred after it was announced that Elon Musk might buy Twitter. And then when he finally took over Twitter later that fall, there were a lot of adjustments. They didn't come all at once. There was a freak out at once. Everyone's attention was directed. And over time, we have seen how that has played out. And some of how that's played out is a fragmentation of the information environment. Blue sky, for as much as MAGA and Trump supporters and maybe Republicans broadly are not on that platform, it's still a pretty prominent platform for certain segments of the population. Like I was on a website that reviews movies and video games a few weeks ago, and where an article in the past might have a link to the author's Twitter profile, all the authors had their Blue Sky links on there. Okay. So there are certain communities and certain segments of the population that still orient toward those platforms. And you know what? That's fine. Okay. I wish it was the case that people didn't believe everything they saw on the internet and would ignore these social media apps broadly as good sources of information. But people do want to be siloed. They want their own information stream. And who am I to take that away from them? All right. So you give it to them. And it's unfortunate that people think more of it than it deserves, but that's how it's going to be. So I think that we're going to see things that fit that pattern in how all this stuff develops. I don't know what that's going to mean financially for the United States in the short term, but I think that I think that the tariffs will be part of that. I think that the outcome of this TikTok thing seems like it's, at least the narrative seeding would suggest that this is a pretty important moment. We also have as I mentioned the other day, some of these narrative through lines are just going to be wrapping up. We're going to have to find what the end of the story is. And I was going to say, we're eventually going to have to figure out what it is that the Defense Department was doing with all those IP addresses. There's a lot of stuff that a lot of open storylines that we don't have conclusions on. And those conclusions are going to have to come at some point, including things like Rico Grande, including things like the Trump class action lawsuits against big tech. There's a lot of chips that are still to fall. And we're just going to have, I mean, I don't want to be patient. Right? Nobody wants to be patient. We would like to know the answers to all these things, but we don't really have another choice because we are in some sense, a necessarily subservient position. And maybe that's just the way of the world. All right. Like maybe there is no government of, by, and for the people. And maybe we need to grow up past our childish understandings of how the world operates. It doesn't operate that way. It operates based on power. It's more similar to Game of Thrones than we ever would have imagined. Imagine all of the people in King's Landing are told that they get to go participate in the elections, and they just keep electing Queen Cersei over and over again. Or maybe, as it would have been by the end, Daenerys Targaryen if she hadn't gone crazy. Spoiler alert. If that illusion is sold to the American public and the American public believes it due to their own desire to believe that they have a bigger say in the outcome of things than they actually do, well, then we're rugging ourselves again. Maybe there's a situation where control can be exerted more locally, but we don't attempt to do that. We don't look after just ourselves because we're obsessed with the soap opera. Okay, so let's get back to Panoonah for a second. Because not only yesterday did she do that ridiculous hearing about the JFK files that produced nothing, she's good at getting attention. Okay? So if people need to keep getting rugged over and over again, if this helps wake up the normies, then fine. I don't think that's what it's all about. 2 days ago, on Monday, this from the New York Post, it was nearly at midnight. They're also mentioning that Val Kilmer died, and that is sad. Anna Paulina Luna resigns from House Freedom Caucus, says mutual respect was shattered. Now, we are led to believe that the House Freedom Caucus, those are all the most hardcore, quote-unquote, conservatives. They're the really tough conservatives in the House. They have not proven to be tough. They've proven mostly to be Ron DeSantis simps and operators of the establishment that try to sell themselves as being aligned with MAGA so that we will see them as our leaders. We should just see the entirety of the House as fake and illegitimate, feckless, useless, and having no actual power. And I think that we have another proof of that yesterday. And I'll get to that in just a second. Luna has teamed up it's the latest escalation in her fight against House GOP leaders and a small group of members on the right flank of their conference over the issue of proxy voting. Luna has teamed up with Democrats and several other Republicans on a mechanism aimed at forcing consideration of legislation that allows new parents in the House to vote remotely for 12 weeks around their baby's birth. I have consistently supported each of you, even in moments of disagreement, honoring the mutual respect that has guided our caucus, Luna wrote. That respect, however, was shattered last week. The focus of her anger is a brief incident from earlier this month when a group of House conservatives held up a chamber-wide vote on unrelated legislation to press GOP leaders to kill Luna's measure known as a discharge petition. Acting within the House conference rules we all agreed to, I sought to bring a vote to the floor on a measure that would allow new mothers in Congress, fewer than 14 in our nation's history, and fathers if they choose to vote by proxy. This was a modest, family-centered proposal, yet a small group among us threatened the Speaker, vowing to halt floor proceedings indefinitely, regardless of the legislation at stake, including President Trump's agenda, unless he altered the rules to block my discharge petition. All right, so we can move on past that. Then this became a big deal yesterday as Panoonah went and messed everything up. This is Nick Sorter on X, formerly Twitter. After less than a day in session, the House is done for the week, Speaker Johnson says. This comes after a handful of Republicans joined all the Democrats to allow certain members to vote from their couches instead of coming into work. Infuriating, he says, wanting the fake, feckless, useless, illegitimate House to do things for some unknown reason, because this is what NormieCon has decided. We need the House to legislate. We need the House to pass Trump's agenda. Clown show.
Well, it's a very disappointing result on the floor there. A handful of Republicans joined with all the Democrats to take down a rule. That's rarely done. It's very unfortunate in this case. 96% of House Republicans voted against proxy voting because they believe it's unconstitutional and they agree that it would open a Pandora's box. And so that's what we just saw. Let me just make this clear. That rule being brought down means that we can't have any further action on the floor this week. That means we will not be voting on the SAVE Act for election integrity. We will not be voting on the rogue judges who are attacking President Trump's agenda. We will not be taking down these terrible Biden policies with the CRA votes. All that was just wiped off the table. It's very unfortunate. We'll regroup and come back, and we'll have to do this again.
Mr. Speaker, were you asking for too much?
Let's listen to those priorities again.
Means that we can't have any further action on the floor this week. That means we will not be voting on the SAVE Act for election integrity. We will not be voting on the rogue judges who are attacking President Trump's agenda. We will not be taking down these terrible Biden policies with the CRA votes. All that was just wiped off the table. It's very unfortunate. We'll regroup and come.
So they can't wipe out the Biden policies, but of course Biden was fake and illegitimate, and a lot of that was his auto pen, and we're seeing some of that play out. They're not going to be able to to pass the SAVE Act that they were never going to be able to pass. The SAVE Act is supposed to solve our elections. The House and the Senate are going to do that. The people who can't even prove that they are legitimately elected are going to go and solve our elections. Well, that's weird. Trump just put out an election integrity executive order last week. Now, that's not going to solve our elections either, but the Congress certainly can't do it. Got to be done at the state level, got to be done at the local level. The government in this current form shouldn't exist. Maybe in effect it doesn't. That is still my theory of the case. But Panoonah wanted to vote for this proxy voting, and it didn't work. So now the House is leaving again. They're not going to get anything done. I would be shocked. Maybe the narrative requires it. I don't know. But we've been told that the Senate's not going to take any of this stuff up until the fall. Trump's talking about his big, beautiful bill. Let's see it. Let's see how it goes. I don't want to see Mike Johnson's package, and I wouldn't approve of it no matter what, but they might. The TV might tell us that they will. Now, I think the proxy voting thing is important, but not because this current House needs to do things. This current House does not need to do things, and the less this current House does things, the better off we'll be. I would like to see them just prove to the public their illegitimacy over and over and over again. And if Panoonah helped us do that, good for her. I'm totally open to the possibility that she is a white hat information op designed to wake up the normies. She's helping lead us through the narrative and the whole thing. Okay, I get it. Right? We've gone through this scenario a million, billion, zillion times, and unfortunately, I still need to restate it every single time. If that's what's happening, then wonderful. But otherwise, the issue of proxy voting is really important for the same reason that the House's inability to rescind what Joe Biden did is important. Joe Biden was fake and illegitimate. The Congress for the last 4 years was also fake and illegitimate. The Congress can't pass legislation to then be signed by the president if the president is fake and illegitimate. Okay? Much of what was done in the Congress throughout the very deadly pandemic period and through the first 2 years of Joe Biden's fake and illegitimate presidency was done by proxy because Nancy Pelosi initiated the proxy voting scheme to deal with the very deadly pandemic. And I'm going to just ask the machine quickly if it can tell me when she instituted the policy, which for the entire time is unconstitutional. Everything under the proxy voting, totally illegitimate. Nancy Pelosi instituted the policy on May 20th, 2020. The policy was extended multiple times, including through July 2021, November 2021, and then later into 2022. Initially opposed by Republicans, the practice was upheld in courts despite constitutional challenges, so saith the machine. And Brookings had an article about this that it links to on January 20th, 2022. Proxy voting takes on new meaning for Republicans. So the uniparty on both sides decided that they were okay with proxy voting. Now, it's going to be explained as something to assist in motherhood. Here is Democrat Congresswoman today. This is my pal, Patriots Are in Control, who clipped this.
Colorado. She was one of the lawmakers who introduced that bipartisan resolution on proxy voting earlier this year before giving birth to her second child, Sam, I believe, who you are holding.
Yes.
He's 9 weeks. How old is Sam?
Yeah, he's 9 weeks old. This is his third trip to D.C. So
it's beautiful. So tell us about what it is that you're fighting for here and what your message is for Speaker Johnson.
Well, we worked in a bipartisan way to bring a resolution. When I listened to Speaker Johnson talk about how it was 96% of Republicans oppose this, that's actually not the case. They didn't stand together on this because they were being threatened. It was going against a rule from the majority. But an overwhelming amount of my colleagues across the aisle also support our efforts to make sure that new parents are able to vote remotely with this narrow circumstance where you have a life event where you give birth or welcoming a new child as a dad, and you have to be there for that critical time where your kid is the most vulnerable. You know, I recently gave birth to Sam, and I was infuriated. You know, before giving birth, closer to my due date, I was unable to fly to Washington to vote. They were unwilling to bring this resolution to the floor. So I was prevented from doing my job, you know, even before giving birth. But then when you give birth, you're unable to, you're healing, you're taking care of your newborn. It's a 24/7 job. It's unacceptable that we haven't evolved with the times.
Narrator, it was not unacceptable that we haven't evolved with the times. It's not unacceptable. Sorry. Be there to do the job. If you can't be there to do the job, then you can't vote. All right? It's not, no one's telling you you can't take the time off. It's just you can't cast a vote. And if there's important legislation, you're going to miss the vote. Sorry. That's how life goes. The Congress shouldn't be passing legislation at the rate it passes legislation in the first place. We actually don't need all these laws. Most of the laws on the book are unconstitutional and therefore should not exist and cannot exist. Okay? When we finally get that phase resolved, what we don't need is a Congress that's in there all the time in the federal government just making laws to run people's lives. Actually, you know what's funny? I had this clip the other day. I hope I can find this again. I'm glad that I just thought of it because it was such an interesting clip. Where did it go? I'm sure that I put it down. The man with the mushroom-shaped head on MSNBC went bonkers the other day about wanting to rescind every law in America. Here it is. Before 1965. This is amazing.
One of my premises for the book is that every law passed before the 1965 Voting Rights Act should be presumptively unconstitutional, right? Because before the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we were functionally an apartheid country. Yeah. Not everybody who lived here could vote here. Yeah. So why should I give about some law that some old white man passed in the 1920s, like the Immigration and Nationality Act? When they passed our fundamental one of my premises for the book is that every law passed before the 1965 Voting Rights Act should be presumptive.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to pull up a picture of what this man looks like. Here is the best version I can quickly find. He looks like Toad from Mario Kart. I mean, except, Toad doesn't look black, but maybe he is. I don't know. So he wants to get rid of all the laws before 1965. Well, here's the thing, Ellie Mistel. If you do that because they're white, first off, you're racist as hell. But second of all the laws passed since 1965 would just be null and void because basically all the laws running this country at this point depend on the unratified 14th Amendment. So if you got rid of that, the whole thing falls apart, buddy. I know you don't know things, but you are plotting your own downfall. You are weaving the rug and then stepping on it, believing it is not a rug. And that has got to be the pinnacle of retardation. Okay. So yeah, we don't need the Congress doing anything. The Congress should not do anything. And if they didn't have the 14th Amendment, the amount of things they'd be able to do would be very, very limited. And if we had real elections, then we could actually hold these people accountable for the rampant violations of their oath that they engage in every single day. And of course, they are basically taking an oath to the 14th Amendment, which is an inversion of the Constitution. And it's not me arguing that, as I often say. George P. Fletcher, Our Secret Constitution, a Columbia Law School professor, a liberal, a communist, a Zionist, is making that argument. Okay? He is the one who argues that it was a full inversion of our Constitution. And that is accepted reasoning from that side. They're just happy about it. They're proud of it. Okay? So let's get to the fake and illegitimate elections from last night in Wisconsin. Actually, before we do that, I mentioned that some of these storylines would be closing. They have to close. And sadly, one of the storylines that I mentioned was the storyline about the Curling v. Raffensperger case from Georgia. We talked the other day about how the Department of Justice dismissed a lawsuit meant to stop a Georgia election integrity bill from 2021. And so I guess that election integrity bill can go forward. I don't know what the status of that is right now, but I suggested this is an interesting thing to be timed out with Trump bringing up the election integrity bill, with Liberation Day, and with the rest of it. And then that evening after the show ended, I think that is when the decision was handed down, but the news kind of came out yesterday. Curling v. Raffensperger was dismissed due to standing. And so I want to go through just the introduction of this here. This is Judge Amy Totenberg, whose sister, Nina Totenberg, is a news lady for NPR. She writes in the opinion, for 7 years, the parties passionately litigated the constitutionality of Georgia's electronic in-person voting system. Naturally, much changed between the early stages of this lawsuit, the multiple preliminary injunction hearings, and the 17-day bench trial on the merits conducted in January 2024. Georgia adopted a new in-person electronic voting system in 2019 and implemented the system in 2020. The new voting system uses a QR code printed on the paper ballots submitted by voters to record and count the selections that voters make on the electronic voting machines. Although the QR code is used to tabulate each person's vote, voters cannot review the contents of the QR code to confirm that it accurately reflects their selections. Plaintiffs thus revised their claims to respond to Georgia's implementation of this new election system. Due to these changes and the case's long history, the court begins by identifying what is and is not at issue at this juncture. This is not a dispute about the results of the 2020 presidential election or the results of any other federal, state, or local election. Plaintiffs' claims instead concern the more ordinary, yet no less critical, interest in safeguarding the credibility and reliability of Georgia's elections. And so she goes and lays out the elements of the case. We don't have to go through all this. I did post this in the info stream on Telegram, t.me/veryreasonable. Okay. If you search the word dismissal, you will find this quickly. This is the last paragraph of the introduction to this opinion. Although plaintiffs have not ultimately prevailed on their legal claims, their work has identified substantial concerns about the administration, maintenance, and security of Georgia's electronic in-person voting system, including those described by their expert witness, Dr. Alex Halderman. And it's J. Alex Halderman. These investigative and educational efforts have prompted meaningful legislative action to bolster the transparency and accountability of Georgia's voting systems. Thus, while this lawsuit must now come to an end, the impact of plaintiffs' important work will endure. And that is a more positive note than we've been led to believe about this case. And I'll tell you in a second why I think that's important. Now, the coverage and the response by Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger makes it seem as though none of that part was just said. I thought I had the link, but give me just 1 second to pull this up. Because these articles all include, the few that I looked at yesterday, all include the same quote from Raffensperger. Hold on 1 second. Here we are. This is from WNEG Radio. And it's probably written by AI, as most of these articles are. One of them even says it. This says it's written by a guy named Chad Dorset. Who knows? It has the same quotes and structure as the AI written articles that went wide yesterday. But all I'm looking for is Raffensperger's quote. He said, "Today's ruling is just one more resounding vindication of Georgia's elections. From day one, we knew these accusations were meritless. All the real-world evidence shows that Georgia's paper ballot system works well. Our local election officials are professionals, and the voters of this state know that their votes are counted securely, accurately, and quickly." Secretary Raffensperger affirmed his commitment to defending Georgia's voting systems against unfounded attacks. This case wasted time, resources, and energy that would have been better spent serving voters. Let this be a lesson. Georgia will always stand firm against those who seek to attack our elections or erode trust in our democracy. So Brad Raffensperger says, or sounds as Brad Raffensperger has ever sounded. That is not what that case affirmed. It was dismissed on a very tough to argue standing claim, claiming that there was no direct injury that plaintiffs could identify, and that part of their case was based on the fact that their ballots were unreviewable, but at the same time, they had to review them at two different stages, once on the machine and then once on the paper. And the judge argued that these two things were refuting one another. Okay. And if you want to read the whole decision, the opinion there, by all means, go ahead and do it. But that's not actually true, of course, because you can verify that your selections are correct on the touch screen, and then the vote is contained in the QR code and the answers are printed out on your ballot. So you can review the answers on the ballot and still not be certain that those answers are represented in the QR code. Okay. That system is totally opaque. That's the problem with it. And that's the reason that it's not self-refuting to say that you can review in these two ways, but still it is ultimately impossible to review overall. So a very unfortunate decision, except for all the evidence that was put into that case and has been held for all these many years. We don't know where else that evidence might be used. That evidence is now part of the public record. Okay. How do you introduce evidence? Well, unfortunately, you might not get the decision you want in this very case, but that evidence is still out there and it can be referenced in other cases. So we can hope that there is still something else going on. I can't promise you there is, but I think there probably is. Also, the standing claim, it changes over time as the judge lays out in the opinion. That is kind of a ridiculous notion, but our legal system is ridiculous. And the standing may have changed over time because when the DOJ dismisses the case against that Georgia election integrity bill, well, the relief that the plaintiffs are seeking could then be nullified by the fact that it's already been granted in a different form in a different venue. Okay. And so I have a hard time believing that an 8-year-old case is just decided on the very same day the DOJ dismisses the case against that Georgia election integrity bill. So, it's one of those things that we don't see all the results immediately. All right. We can use our best judgment doing the research, having tracked these things for a period of years now, and think, hey, maybe these are the new potentialities that have opened up. Okay. This one door has closed, but others are open before us. And so we might step through one of those. If we are waiting for the news to tell us that this is what this means, and now this case over here is probably going to be successful based on the evidence introduced in Curling v. Raffensperger, we're never going to get to that point. All right. So some of this can be inferred. And you can believe it or not believe it. That is entirely up to you, right? These are our judgments to make. Somebody asked me on Truth Social today, are you saying Charlie Kirk is a bad guy? I'm saying, look at what Charlie Kirk is doing and decide for yourself. And we'll get to Charlie Kirk in just a second. Okay, so there was another, before we get to the elections themselves, there was another lawsuit filed on Monday. Nonprofit groups and Democrats sued Trump administration over election executive order. This from the Associated Press. They're talking about the Campaign Legal Center, the State Democracy Defenders Fund. That was who brought the first lawsuit. And then the DNC, the Democrat Governors Association, and Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer followed soon with a complaint of their own. The president's executive order is an unlawful action that threatens to uproot our tried and tested election systems and silence potentially millions of Americans, said Danielle Lang, a senior director of voting rights at the DC-based Campaign Legal Center. It is simply not within the president's authority to set election rules by executive decree, especially when they would restrict access to voting in this way. The White House didn't respond to a request for comment. Now, is that what Donald Trump attempted to do? Did he attempt to change election laws or alter how elections were run? I would say the answer is no. He ordered the various agencies and departments in the executive branch to uphold laws already on the books, enforce those laws, prosecute where necessary, and to restrict funding to states that didn't uphold those laws. He used what power he has vested in the executive branch to move toward election integrity. He can't do it all. That's no slight to Donald Trump. He has limited powers as president. He has great powers, but nonetheless limited. And so he's going to use those powers to the best of his ability. Did he do that? I can't tell you 100% he did it, but he did a bunch of things that hopefully might help, or at least might bring some accountability or whatever. Okay. And so there's this effort to oppose those. They don't want voter ID. But did we get voter ID? Well, we are told we got voter ID in Wisconsin last night. This is the Washington Post from this morning reporting on the event. 3 takeaways from the Wisconsin and Florida elections. And this subheading got me. Democrats won a Wisconsin Supreme Court race and lost 2 Florida special elections Tuesday. And they lost the whole amendment, the constitutional amendment part of the Wisconsin elections somehow. But the trends are clearly pointing in their direction. So 3 out of the 4 major elections yesterday, fake though they may be, fake though they may be, there we go. The trends are still going toward the Democrats. The first big elections of 2025 were held Tuesday, giving the first major indicator of where the country stands since President Donald Trump's 2024 election win 6 months ago. Wisconsin held a much watched and expensive state Supreme Court race featuring a very heavy dose of Elon Musk, while Florida hosted a pair of special elections for U.S. House seats, including one that looked potentially competitive, despite Trump carrying the district by 30 points just 6 months ago. Encouraging signs for Democrats, they say. Let's look at this, though, down here. In Florida, despite Democrats and polls playing up the competitiveness of White House National Security Advisor Michael Waltz's old 6th congressional district, Republican Randy Fine carried it by 14 points. In the 1st congressional district, formerly held by Republican Matt Gaetz, Republican Jimmy Petronis won by a similar 14.6 margin. So these races didn't wind up being anything amounting to close calls, but these are districts that Trump had carried by much larger margins, 30 or more points in each of them. In the end, Democrats overperformed their margins. Given these results, you begin to see why the White House pulled Elise Stefanik's nomination for UN ambassador last week. Her district had favored Trump by 21 points, and these results suggested that a Democrat flip was within the realm of possibility. The numbers look a lot like what they were in early special elections in 2017, when Democrats overperformed by 21 and 15 points in April and May special elections. The Democrats went on to have a good 2018 midterm election. None of it means Democrats are definitely back and primed for big victories in 2025 and 2026. They've done well in an off year and special elections plenty before in the Trump era, and it hasn't always carried through, but these election results are clearly good signs for them, and these weren't the only encouraging results. So blah, blah, blah. The Democrats overperformed despite losing 3 out of 4 fake elections that had national attention. They didn't even mention the ballot measure to make the voter ID law a constitutional amendment, thus making it harder to rescind. And why not? It begins to seem as though the narrative is set in place regardless of what reality emerges. They were going to tell us that the Democrat momentum, that all the momentum was on the Democrat side. All right. James Carville told us in that clip we played on Monday, all the momentum is headed in the Democrat direction. That momentum is going to be proven by the results of the fake elections on Wednesday morning. Everyone will see it. That's not what we see, but that is what they're telling us. Why? Because elections are fake and they are only narrative psyops. They are meant to get people to believe certain things about the state of the world, about the beliefs of their friends and neighbors, the other people out there, their fellow Americans. The narrative plays forward no matter what the reality becomes, because the narrative is scripted. They need to say that the Democrats have gained all the momentum, even though at the same time we're getting Democrat approval ratings at like 26% for the party or 21% for the party. The country cannot stand the Democrat Party nor any of its agenda, and we are nonetheless being told that they have all the momentum based on elections that they lost. It's madness. It cannot make sense in a world with real elections because people would reject this sort of retardation, but they don't reject it because it's all a narrative psyop, and whoever is conditioned to still follow along with these psyops, believing that somehow they represent reality, is going to still buy this stuff. This is traditional political analysis. It doesn't make any sense. Peter Berniger on X, formerly Twitter, talking about the Wisconsin race. Liberal Susan Crawford did not win the election last night. See how she committed election fraud at the end of this tweet. 2023, Wisconsin. State Supreme Court race, Brown County, Green Bay. Results on the right, 77,000 roughly voted. Note the percentages. 2024, Wisconsin Supreme Court race, Brown County. Results on the left, almost 100,000 voted, or about 100,000 voted. Virtually the same percentages. And what we have here, 48, and he meant to say 2025 there, not 2024. Brad Schimmel, 48.25%. Susan Crawford, 51.43%. Okay. The other graphic he refers to, Danielle Kelly, the loser, 48.24% rather than 48.25%, and 51.53% for the Democrat Janet Lady. 51.53 versus 51.43. So that is off by 0.1 of a point in the victorious Democrat total. And they are off by 1/100th of a point for the losing total, the losing percentage. He says it's almost like an algorithm is running. And of course, an algorithm is running. 62.7% voted for the referendum requiring voter ID to be in the state constitution. Yet liberal Susan Crawford, quote unquote, won, with Democrat politicians only having 21% approval rating nationally. And Crawford outright stated that she would repeal the existing statutory voter ID law passed in 2015. Liberal Susan Crawford committed massive smurfing, i.e., criminal money laundering. A 45-page complaint was filed before the election to the FBI. In addition, Patriot Jay Stone filed a 10-page complaint to the Wisconsin Ethics Commission, and Patriot Julia Seegers filed a judicial complaint to the Wisconsin Judicial Commission. Smurfing is a scourge on our elections across the country. Liberal Crawford and her co-conspirators laundered millions into her campaign. This is election fraud. She, Ben Wickler, Act Blue, and the Wisconsin Democrat Party and the others involved must be prosecuted. So again, we see evidence of algorithmic manipulation of the vote totals. The system produces the results, independent of the voters. You can see another impossible outcome, okay? And I'm not yelling at my audience because my audience obviously knows these things. I'm just trying to provide emphasis on how obvious this has to be at this point, okay? People still have doubts about this stuff. Well, you can't provide the hard evidence that says that elections are stolen. This is the hard evidence. If you think that those algorithmically generated totals could match like that 2 years apart, then you're nuts. If you think it's possible that people voted for the liberal Supreme Court judge that says she's going to overturn the decision on voter ID, and also those same people vote for the voter ID to be put in the Constitution, you're nuts, okay? This is one of those times where you just have to think independently. Is that possible? No, it's not. In North Carolina in 2024, in the fake elections of last fall, that Donald Trump calls fake.
Sports has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Yeah, okay. Let's just say
it is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
Excuse me.
The whole thing is ridiculous. Okay? Impossible results. 2024, North Carolina, Mark Robinson became a national figure. People like him. He's a very well-spoken, forcefully spoken guy. Seems like a principled man. I don't know how he is as a person. Donald Trump, the difference between Trump's win in North Carolina and Robinson's loss as a Republican in North Carolina in a statewide race was 1 million votes. 1 million votes. In Arizona, Mark Kelly beat Kari Lake. The difference between Trump's win in Arizona and the Kari Lake loss, hundreds of thousands of votes. These results are impossible. And seeing impossible results is all you should need to know. As a responsible, patriotic American who actually cares about having representation in this country, it is totally unpatriotic and irresponsible of us to accept the outcome of these elections. Okay? If you see an impossible result, the response has to be, until that thing is fully reviewed and every single one of those votes is proven legitimate and the outcome is proven legitimate, there is no way in hell I am going to believe in these results. And I will scream it from the rooftops, and I will never comply with anything these people say. Anything. Okay? We have to get to that point because the elections are fake. I don't know how it can be more proven. Even the normies are beginning to understand that our elections are fake. And let's keep going. Here is Caroline Wren on X, formerly Twitter. So the Democrat candidate for Supreme Court in a special election got more votes in Dane County than the Democrat nominee for U.S. Senate did in 2022. Nothing to see here, folks. Is that believable? Of course not. It is not remotely believable that more Democrats came out to vote yesterday than did in a 2022 statewide Senate race. This is CNN this morning. Turnout in Wisconsin's Supreme Court race was remarkable for an off-year election. The liberal prevailed in a technically nonpartisan Wisconsin State Supreme Court race that took on national importance as a proxy fight between Democrats and Republicans supporting President Donald Trump. Turnout in the race was remarkable for an off-year election in which state Supreme Court judge was the highest-ranking office on the ballot, an indication that Americans remain deeply engaged in the electoral process. There were 1.8 million votes cast in the state's last Supreme Court race in 2023. More than 2.3 million people voted in Tuesday's contest. Compare that with the 2023 race. Turnout is higher in every single county. How about that? It was still low compared to a presidential election, they want us to know, but it was much closer to the roughly 2.7 million who voted for governor in 2018 and 2022. So it wasn't only the Senate race in 2022, the governor's race as well. Again, these numbers are impossible, but let's focus on the 500,000 difference. 2 years later, in that same Supreme Court race, there was a 500,000 more votes counted, or I should say reported, last night than in 2023. And again, let's look at the Berniger numbers here. A 500,000 vote difference, and you get the exact same percentages, one down to 1/10 of a point, the other down to 100th of a point. Okay? That's impossible. And when something is impossible, we don't actually have to bring the evidence to prove it's not true, because that sort of evidence doesn't exist. You just know it's impossible, and then you don't believe it. Okay, continuing. How about this little celebration video for winning 1 out of 4 races?
Wisconsin, to all of you, I just wanted to pop by to say thank you. You all are just extraordinary. You love our country. You care. You are making such extraordinary sacrifices on behalf of so many people, on behalf of communities, on behalf of people you may never meet. And I just say thank you. There is an unelected billionaire who should not and will not have a greater voice than the working people of Wisconsin.
And I imagine you probably saw her reading that brief diatribe. Speaking of those billionaires, this is CNN from this morning, or maybe from last night.
I think it's an interesting tactic. It's a little Saul Alinsky-ish in the sense that you've got George Soros and J.D. Pritzker and Reid Hoffman and all these billionaires who've spent far more than Musk did in this, and now pointing and saying, well, wait a minute.
I don't think they spent on this. They didn't.
Well, collectively, if you look at all the money from outside that was given to her, again, 77% of it came from out of state, only 15% came from Schimmel, and collectively, a number of the analysis showed.
I'm just saying, like in terms of the money from
individually,
J.B. Pritzker.
if you look at the whole outside money that came from out of the state, clearly.
But you don't think it was a referendum on Musk at all, though?
Oh, I think it had a part of it. I think there are a lot of different issues. I think.
First off, pretending that a fake election result is a referendum on Elon Musk is moronic, but that is just another step in the narrative game. So the Democrat billionaires, J.B. Pritzker, among them, spent more money than Elon Musk did. And yet we're told that Elon Musk is the bad guy for spending money. And Elon Musk, of course, is drawing attention to himself and whatever. It's not, the money is insignificant, except for the fact that money buys elections. Ana Navarro on X, formerly Twitter, our billionaire beat your billionaire. Now that comma in there is just her not knowing language. But That's J.B. Pritzker holding a dog and Elon Musk with cheese on his head. He is representing as a cheesehead. That's a thing for Green Bay Packers games. I didn't think he just randomly had cheese on his head. Don't worry. I can just imagine Wisconsin people being like, that's our state hat. I'm just kidding. I love Wisconsin people. Here's Donald Trump reacting on Truth Social to these elections today. Or last night, I should say. Voter ID just approved in Wisconsin election. Democrats fought hard against this, presumably so they can cheat. This is a big win for Republicans, maybe the biggest win of the night. It should allow us to win Wisconsin, like I just did in the presidential election for many years to come. Well, I suppose it could help them win for many years to come. But that is probably unlikely. They're fake elections, so who knows what that's going to mean. But he's calling attention to that win, a 62.7, I think it was. That's how much they approved that measure by, while also voting for the woman who promises to overturn that measure. Don't think so. That does not make sense. Now let us get to the people who promoted this election the hardest. This is the biggest producer of the raw materials for election fraud that you could ever imagine pretending to be Republican. This is, or at least pretending to be America First or MAGA, etc. He's pretending to be a member of the Republican establishment very well. But this is Scott Presler. He said last night, once a day until November 4th, I'm going to post about the New Jersey gubernatorial election with a bunch of emojis. You can flip the New Jersey governorship from blue to red by voting on Tuesday, November 4th, 2025. Let the game begin. Today is day one. Okay, dude. Whatever. So just moving on, not talking about the election fraud, just moving on. And another note about Presler. This is Matt on Truth Social tagging me in this post and tag some others in another. Text message from Scott Presler takes me to WinRed website to donate to him. Scott Presler, I need help. I'm too busy chasing ballots in Wisconsin to write a catchy text. Please sponsor a ballot chaser. Didn't you get $5 million from Charlie Kirk to be able to do that? You fraud. And speaking of Charlie Kirk, here's Charlie Kirk on X, formerly Twitter. We did a lot in Wisconsin, but we fell short. Well, that's weird. He's talking about the Supreme Court race. Donald Trump said we won. That was the big win, the biggest of the night. Charlie Kirk says we fell short. We must realize and appreciate that we are the low prop party now. The party has been remade. That means low propensity voter. Okay? So the voters come out for Donald Trump, but only Donald Trump. Therefore, when Donald Trump is gone, you can't expect Donald Trump-like elections for Republicans. Special elections and off-cycle elections will continue to be a problem without a change of strategy. We are a party of welders, waiters, and plumbers. We are the party of people who work with their hands, who shower before and after work. Policy is an afterthought for many of our supporters. They have common sense and American values, but they are voters who must be chased. Okay, that's Scott Presler's operation, the ballot chasing, ballot harvesting. They don't call it harvesting because we all know that ballot harvesting is bad, but ballot chasing is just fine. Democrats have become the college indoctrinated, institutionalized, and government-dependent high-propensity party. They live for politics. It is their religion. Well, Charlie, your entire job is indoctrinating the nation's youth into the religion of the GOP establishment. Such a fraud, such a hypocrite, such a liar. It's unbelievable. If he's not doing a white hat info op, and we have to go through that whole thing again, right? Scott Presler, white hat info op. Charlie Kirk, white hat info op. I get it. If it's not that, and it's this, and the influenceable and influencer-driven information op to create the illusion of consensus, to create the illusion that Charlie Kirk has captured the youth vote and that they're not just rejecting the Democrat Party scam. If it's not that, then he's just a massive fraud and a liar and not helping wake up the normies. He's helping keep them asleep. He says you may hate Donald Trump, but he resurrected a dead GOP back to life. Voters who weren't on anyone's data rolls came out of the woodwork to vote for Donald Trump. Our movement must begin to fully fund the infrastructure to match the Democrat machine. Our ideas are better. They're actually popular. But we need to match like for like. We need to out-organize Democrats. We need to match their fundraising advantage. Let Wisconsin be a wake-up call. Let it be a call to return to the front lines. We won in November, but to save the Republican, he must mean the Republic. We must string together multiple victories, and that starts in 2026. Oh, well, Scott just told us it starts in 2025. And he didn't only say that for New Jersey. He made the same post for Virginia. So he's going to be really involved in those places once again. And he's just going to be signing voters up like crazy and then chasing their ballots, whatever that means. That's going to make the elections real, or at least we can win fake elections, but they're not fake elections to these guys. They're real elections. And how do you solve those real elections? Well, this is what Charlie Kirk is asking for. Our movement must begin to fully fund the infrastructure to match the Democrat machine. Well, what infrastructure would that be? The ballot chasing operation, right? Ballot harvesting, and of course the registrations. So he wants voter registration and ballot harvesting, and he wants the information apparatus that the Democrats have. Well, who has that apparatus? By golly, it's Charlie Kirk. He has all those things. The ballot chasing apparatus, the ballot harvesting apparatus is what it really is. The voter registration and the communications, all centralized under Charlie Kirk. And what does he need? Fully funding. Donor money going to the Democrats. Who's Charlie Kirk? Scott Pressler funneling donations to? WinRed. What is WinRed? Oh, it's just like Act Blue. One side, the other side. Uniparty left, uniparty right. The case is made, okay? It's believe it or don't believe it. To continue making the case almost diminishes the case. We'll wrap up here with JD exclamation point. The political problem on the Republican side of the aisle is how to get our base to vote in off-cycle elections. We've seen the establishment finally accept Donald Trump's leadership of the Republican Party. Now it's time to try to actually learn from his political success. So JD reiterates the same point made by Charlie Kirk. How does it happen? Don't know. I will be back on Friday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.